Good evening. We will be getting started shortly. We have several people reported that they're parking, and we will be starting in 5 minutes. Thank you. Please fill the seats in the front. Please take the seats closest to the front. We will be starting shortly.
Barbie, William, Durham. It's the 1930s. High Street is bustling. Theaters, restaurants, students all over the place. It's a much different picture in the South. The Jim Crow laws are everywhere. Blatant, overt discrimination against people of color. But here in Columbus, there was no racism. At least not on the surface. It was deep-rooted. Here on High Street and in the University District, one man, one African-American gentleman, took to keeping track of all of the prejudices he faced, of all of the moments of discrimination he witnessed. At restaurants, the prices had different menus. Prices were doubled for African Americans. They were served cold food. And theaters, like this one, suddenly had no seats for people of color. Covert racism was alive and well in Columbus, Ohio then, as it is today. Friends, Barbie, William, Durham didn't sit idly by. He was a graduate of The Ohio State University, an African American, a pharmacy grad. He took to keeping track of everything, the data he needed to prove his point. He was writing The Lantern, he was making his case, and in 1940, he helped establish the Vanguard League. The Vanguard League went on to help change so much of the mindset, not only in Columbus, but in Ohio. Barbie William Durham died in 1995, but it's this candle that we light for him tonight. Scientists have told us that the single light of a candle can be seen 10 football fields away, 1.6 miles. That's astonishing, because that's exactly the distance we are today from the Ohio Stadium. Here in the historic Garden Theater, we have work to do. We need to pull all of the candles closer together so that we can look at them as a community and say, yes, these are change makers. Like Barbie William Durham, the stories you're going to hear tonight are just as important. We're taking on issues tonight, but it's not the end. In fact, it's just the beginning. In your pamphlet, you have a card that's asking you the issues you care about and want to hear next. Fill the card out and give it to us at intermission or before you leave tonight. Add your contact information, and we'll be sure to be in touch with you. Tonight is a night about testing things out in Test City, USA. Test City is a place where if it happens here, it'll happen everywhere. If we can help solve covert racism or some of the other issues we're going to address today, then I believe that it could spread everywhere. But this is about Columbus, and it's about social change, the kind of social change that affects the lives of people in our community. My name is David All, and I'm going to be your host tonight. We're on a journey together, taking a test to see what moves us, what motivates us, what inspires something inside of us to bring about change in our community. I'm going to start at the end of the night and work my way back to the front. So at the end of the night, before you leave here tonight, if you want, there's an optional naloxone training. So if you're an employer, if people on the job, if anyone is using an opioid, or a friend or a colleague, anyone, if you walk by and someone is potentially passed out, you could administer this free drug, and it could save their life from an opioid overdose. David Brown. Many know him as the choir director of the Harmony Project. Many of you sing for him. But for me, he was really the inspiration for tonight. He was the reason why I wanted to expand our pool of storytellers, because his own personal story, which he'll share tonight, is so powerful. He not only lives an exemplary life for us as the choir director and everything he's doing, but in his own life, he's someone that we all look up to. And I'm personally motivated by the fact that he's such a radical unifier. Before and after the intermission, there will be a 15-minute intermission, and you're welcome to grab pizza and drinks back to your seats during that time. We're going to hear from 5 different storytellers who bring a unique perspective about how their lives have been shaped in Columbus by some of these issues that just seem to go unnoticed. But not anymore. And we're going to get started back where it's going to end with the opioid epidemic. I've worked on this issue for several years, and I can tell you that it's not getting any better. 1.7 individuals, our neighbors, our friends, our family members, die every single day here in Columbus due to a suspected opioid overdose. We need change, but it's not necessarily going to come from the top down. It's going to come from the grassroots and all of us coming together around this issue, which is the worst drug epidemic in the history of our country. And it's the worst here. So with that, I'd like to welcome Ann Fisher from WOSU's All Sides with Ann Fisher up to the stage. And if I can have my friends help us with our seating. So Ann has really inspired me to create this town hall experience because she's so well-versed, not only in this issue, but in our community and so well-known. So I'm really inspired that you're here, and thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Thank you. I want to introduce my guests for this conversation. Cornell Lewis, he's a firefighter with the Columbus Fire Department. And also the clinical director for the YMCA of Central Ohio, Bela Ko-Krompetcher. When we were first talking about this a few weeks ago, they said, well, say a little something about yourself and the issue. And I said, well, you know, I'm not an expert. You know, I'm always very hinky about that kind of a thing. And they said, well, you are all right. You're not a clinical expert or something like that. But it did make me think. And David gave me an assignment, and I went home and I wrote an essay. But I'll just say that I first encountered, you know, the whole issue of opioid addiction as a very young child. When I was in the 5th grade, I read James Michener's The Drifters. And I really didn't understand much about it, but there was a heroin addict in the story. And then about a year later, our class was forced to go see a screening of The Cross and the Switchblade. That was in 1970. Yeah. Anybody remember that one? The idea of opioid addiction, of heroin addiction at the time was nothing more than a plot device to me. I didn't really understand what it meant or if it had anything to do with anything. As a State House reporter, I covered what I call the season of the sheriff in the Ohio General Assembly in the early 1990s, and I called it that because back then everybody wanted to be, they were all running for sheriff. Everybody wanted to be the big crime fighter in the room, and they were always one-upping each other on how hard they could crack down on criminals, the easiest target of which, of course, were drug-related criminals. But they weren't interested in the origins of drug abuse. That issue came up, or the origins of drug addiction, and it came up a lot. They wanted to get the dealers, and they wanted them bad with all their three strikes and you're out things. So they weren't interested in the testimony, and there was testimony that pointed to the addicts, the users, you know, the hurdles that they faced. When I wound up covering Appalachia for a year when I moved to the Columbus Dispatch, that was at the end of the decade, and I didn't recognize the issue for what it was. We vaguely knew about the presence of the opioid pill mills, although we didn't even call them that at that time. They were legal. We knew something was running amok down there, but we weren't sure what it was. And I never connected all of this with the increasingly common image. And I remember it very well driving down the road thinking, why is that person walking along without a shirt on and no shoes, and they seem completely lost, and it's, you know, Highway 50 in southern Ohio. It just didn't make any sense to me. Not until I read the book Dreamland by journalist Joe Nocera a few years ago did I connect the dots between all of that and what I would now recognize, of course, as an addict, probably an opioid addict, and that I was covering a region that would eventually become known as the ground zero for the opioid epidemic in the United States. So I didn't know it. It was also vague. By then, I'd already hosted, though. By the time I interviewed Joe Nocera, which was a privilege. I've interviewed him a couple different times, once with the Columbus Metropolitan Club. But by that time, you know, I'd hosted many, many shows about the opioid crisis. And it started with a segment about how the problem had reached the suburbs, which is a really interesting thing. And it's been an issue for a lot of people that it didn't really reach our consciousness until then. That was about 8.5 years ago. And then I counted today. I went and I looked. Since I started the show 8.5 years ago, I have discussed the opioid crisis in one way or another, from teen addiction to recovery issues on Wellness Wednesday, on Tech Tuesday, you name it, on 65 All Sides shows. And that's a lot. I would venture to guess that besides the issue of diabetes, which is another crisis in this country, I don't think I've covered anything as much. So with that said, I wanted to give you a little background about my interest in this and my coverage of it, and then turn to Cornell Lewis and tell us what you do. Tell us your story.
Yeah, and I appreciate you all having me here. First of all, I like to say that I've been a Columbus firefighter for the last 20 years here in the city, and I've grown because this chair is quite small. I didn't know how small this chair was, Bella. Wow. Yep, I'm gonna have some marks on the legs from that. So anyway, that's a little joke I like to open up with. So first of all, I'm a pastor of the Expanding Visions Ministries Church in Gehenna. I'm also the executive director of a nonprofit organization doing career development called Expanding Visions Foundation. And been a Columbus firefighter for the last 20 years, and for the last year of my life, I've been heavily involved in the opiate response that the Columbus Fire Department has brought about to try to, for lack of a better term, arrest the situation and give people help who are on the streets, who are dealing with this epidemic. And so basically what we've been doing is we've been going into the streets, we've been going into the hospitals, and offering rehab, offering detox. And it is a one-on-one conversation. For 20 years, at least for 19 years, I have thought to myself, if I take you to the hospital, everything gets better. I go back, I watch the Ohio State game or the Cleveland Cavaliers, and then I go home the next morning and everything went well because I got you to the hospital, which is where you needed to be anyway. After I brought you back to life, I got you to the hospital, everything's good. And then a few years ago, I started seeing the same people daily. And I mean for a week at a time. And then sometimes I saw them 2 or 3 times a day, overdosed, and I'm thinking, what is this? And for the last year, I've been on an education journey, and because I found out that just taking them to the hospital wasn't good enough. So the Columbus Fire Department got together with Adam H. and a few other organizations and began Mary Haven and began an outreach program where we go into the streets, as I said, and we offer detox to people, we offer rehab, and we'll take you straight from the street into those facilities to get you that help. So it's been very eye-opening for me. I lived through the crack era, and I lost a lot of friends. And so it's been very eye-opening for me to be a part of this, that it is not one way anymore where we help you, then we leave. I get a lot of looks. People say, "You're here for what?" And I'm like, "I'm here to help you with this situation." They're like, "The fire department's doing that now?" And then I get a hug. Then I get a hey. And we get to talking, and I'll put them in my vehicle and take them straight to detox. So yeah, that's who I am.
And by the way, he was one of those 65 programs. You were on to talk about this, I don't know, a year or so ago, soon after it started. Bela, what's your story?
Well, oddly enough, as I spoke to you earlier, tomorrow I have 16 years of sobriety. So my story ending up here this is kind of a weird circle. Some people may recognize me as a guy who used to be behind the counter at Used Kids many years ago. So I was a high street rat, record store guy, and was very involved in all of that. After I got sober, I started doing a lot of 12-step work, volunteer. And I figured, well, like every alcoholic or addict who gets sober, they want to become a counselor. So I decided I would do that and got a degree in counseling. And at the same time, there was a dear friend of mine who was a musician, Jenny May is her name, and she just passed away this past fall. And as I got sober and got into school and started getting my degrees and started working with the homeless, I couldn't help her. And her story is really terrifying in a sense, where mentally ill, alcoholic, National Honor Society, Ohio State Band, and she ended up homeless about 2 blocks from our house in Clintonville. And just remember trying to get her into treatment, trying to get her help, and not being able to make it stick. And there was one time I was in the squad car with her, and she looked at me and she was crying and said, "This shouldn't happen to me. Something is wrong, Bela." And she said, "Can you do something to change it?" And I was like, shit, I don't know. But, you know, in a way, that's why I do what I do now. And so I've run the Franklin County Drug Court. I've run the Veterans Court. I worked at the VA. And now I'm the clinical director of the YMCA, and I'm in charge of oversee 3 housing programs where we mostly house the men who are formerly homeless or at risk for homelessness. We do have a lot of the opioid epidemic hits us hard. We use Narcan usually, almost weekly there. We educate our residents on it. The YMCA also runs one of the largest family and women's shelter in the country, and we have some of the folks. Malik is here and Steve is here from the YMCA, and so it hits us there too. This is pretty powerful stuff. And then in my spare time, I teach at Ohio State. So,
Cornell Lewis, we can get into this. Bayla said something to me earlier, is something we were talking about earlier, is the system, the whole treatment system, the whole system is set up for white men with insurance. So I'm kind of wondering, when you get them into treatment, where is this magical place? I mean, how are you finding this and making it work?
Well, first of all, I want you to talk to my wife. I want my wife to call me Cornell Lewis every day. Cornell Lewis. Not only when she's mad. Not only when she's mad, Ann. Not only when she's mad. But you say it with such reverence. No, so, the one thing I will say is that a lot of people have come together to make this work. One thing I always tell people is this is a team effort. And so there is a place that we are currently taking people, the Maryhaven Addiction Stabilization Center. It just opened on South High Street. And I remember working at that hospital as a paramedic on my off days. And so when they turned it into this addiction stabilization center, I'm thinking to myself, okay, do you realize that there's going to be people just walking in from everywhere to get help? And so we worked extremely hard with them, the Columbus Fire Department. We got a lot of great chiefs over there with a lot of great insight into this. And so we began to transport people there. And what I was hearing from people on the street, because, I go out every week and ride around and talk to people. And the one thing I was hearing was, you've got to get me a longer stay than 3 days. That 3 days is not going to do me any good. And if that's all you're offering, I'm staying out here.
That's not about opioid addiction.
Yeah. And I'm staying out here. And so when that happened, they got those longer stays. And I just got a call day before yesterday from a brother and a brother-in-law I took in. And he said to me, he said, "Do you remember you told me if I needed anything that I could call you?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And I'm kind of nervous because I'm like, you can't have Miss Lewis's credit card. I'm sorry. You can't have her credit card. So he said, "I need some socks because I've decided to stay residential and keep it going." And I was so proud of him for that. And then he said, "Well, really it's because you sat down on the steps and talked to me and didn't just rush through it and say, hey, you going or not? If you're not, so what?" So that's where we've been taking them, man. And I don't know if it's a magical place or whatever, but they're doing good work over there.
Yeah, Maryhaven is. But talk about that, what the system's really built for and why.
One is there's got to be a recognition that not all drugs and intoxicants are the same. I was alcohol, and nobody's going to drink a six-pack and die where somebody may put a needle in their arm and be dead. So there's got to be a recognition of that. And the treatment has to save lives first, in the sense where it has to be on demand. It has to vary on how the addict wants it. It has to, because there are very powerful forces that keeps a heroin addict to keep using, whether it's a housing situation, whether it's a child issue. Women don't want to get treatment because they're going to get their kids taken away. So you have these very powerful forces of why people don't get into treatment. So I think what we need to do is look at the design, because the design of the treatment model over the last 70 years is based off the 12-step model, which turned into the Minnesota model. It worked for me. It worked. I could do outpatient treatment 3 times a day, or 3 times a week for 3 hours a day, and go to my meetings. And I had a wife that supported me, and I had insurance, and I did that for 9 months, basically, treatment. When you look at what this epidemic looks like, and the young people it touches, that is an impossibility. And I saw that running the drug court. So one is using medically assisted treatment. For those of you who are not who are not familiar, that's called MAT. And it is being progressive in how we think what treatment could look like. Needle exchanges, cutting down on HIV, hepatitis C, engaging those addicts when they come in, getting them food, getting them Medicaid. There's talk about changing Medicaid in this state, and I'm just going to put it out there. It will kill thousands of people if it goes away.
Eliminating the expansion.
Eliminating the expansion. And I want to put this out there, too. Whatever your persuasion, we end up paying for that as taxpayers. They're going to end up in the morgue. They're going to end up in the hospital. So I think as we look at it, it's an exciting time because we can change treatment. And we have enough stakeholders to actually do that. But again, we need to come as a community and as a nation and get all the different factions together to address it.
What do we mean by community? Do we mean just professionals like you and Cornell Lewis? Or
where's my wife?
that poor woman.
Raise your hand, honey.
Yeah.
I see you.
But because you guys haven't met before, right? You know, you guys haven't met before.
But we were talking. It's like we could sit here for hours, right?
I saw you up there talking, and that's why I thought about that. I thought, what if we just got everybody in a room that does this, and how would you ever let go of each other because there's so much to talk about? But what do we mean by community? What role does somebody who's not a professional in the biz like you guys are, who's maybe a student at Ohio State? I mean, what do we mean by that?
Well, one is, so everyone is touched by this, everyone, whether you know somebody who's died from it or been impacted, you know, as taxpayers, as community members, as students, it touches everybody. I was counseling a kid who lived in Arlington, and 2 weeks before he went off to play football, he overdosed and died. He's 17 years old. So it does touch everybody. So one is we bring people together and we see what the solutions are. What I think is fantastic is that we have people like David who got involved with this, who's not from this field, getting together and looking at it. So as we were talking earlier, and again, this is something people can Google, there's an idea called recovery capital, which says people need 3 things to sustain recovery. And one of those, so it's family and peer support, it is employment or education, and it is community support. So if you look at these communities that are impacted, these are in communities of trauma. They're traumatized, so they need jobs, they need public transportation. So we look at these and what, as a community, do we need to put forth? And are we really going to do it? Are we going to put the money behind it? Are we going to forgive addicts for using and not put them in jail and get them jobs and get them their dignity? Because then we give ourselves the dignity.
Yeah.
You know, I heard a line the other day from the warden of the prisons, and he said this. He said, let's put people in prison who are supposed to be there and not put people in prison because we're mad at them. Yeah. And so I start with the education piece because I think we need to get better educated and stop being afraid of the problem so much and be better educated. We're looking at not just, you know, needles and a drug user using a needle. You've got people in your families who are addicted to opiates. They got a cabinet full. One place in New Jersey, talked to the ombudsman there. he said his biggest problem right now is in the housing market. And he said because addicts are asking realtors for walkthroughs of homes, and they're going through the medicine cabinets. And so realtors were like, they weren't in the room at first, Dan, but he brought them into the room because he said, this is a huge problem we're having. So you got to make sure that you're being very, and you know, like Bella said, he's a big thinker, being very strategic about asking the community, the people who live there, what can we do to help you, as opposed to riding in on a horse and saying, here's how we're going to help you. Can you talk to me because I live here and I'm telling you what I know? And so I believe this, that without education, one of the greatest men I know, John Perkins, I went to visit him in Mississippi, and in his books about restoring at-risk community, he talks about going to live there. You know, going and making sure you know what's going on in the community. Cultural competency is key, so yeah.
Like the guy who wrote that book, Evicted, and lived in Milwaukee. We have questions from some of our audience. Melly?
Yes, I have some questions for you, Ann.
Okay.
So I was asked, or it was shared with me, that the opioid epidemic and the fear related to it is very similar to the fear the black community had around crack. It was said, for some reason, however, people take on a different level of humanity related to the opioid epidemic. Why do you think that might be?
Yeah, and I made a scant reference to it when I talked about the first show I ever did on it on All Sides happened to be when it breached, you know, the gates of the suburban experience. What about that? Why is it different?
Yeah, I personally myself, I grew up in Lincoln Park Projects down the south end of Columbus, and there were no jobs. There were no jobs, and so you had young men and young women doing whatever they could to get a job, which meant we had trickle-down economics. I've got to sell this so I can get money. And consequently, the fear was not in our community of the crack era. It wasn't. There was no fear there. It was what people did. We did see people who died or who were taken to prison, but it wasn't a fear in the community. The fear that we saw was on television, because night after night you would see bodies laying in the street, and we knew Mr. and Mrs. America was looking at that going, hey, there needs to be a war on drugs. Well, what that really kind of meant to us was there was going to be a war on us as black people. And so we kind of took that personally. And so there is a difference in there somewhere. Sometimes I look at it, and I you know, when I first got started in this, it just kind of blew my mind, because I'm like, you know, one guy just asked me, he said, why aren't black people doing heroin? And I'm thinking, I've seen a few, but, you know, overwhelmingly. And I thought about discrimination in medicine, because I thought about people who had insurance to be able to get the opiates. And, you know, I thought about the Tuskegee experiment, that I'm not putting a needle in my arm. And so there was a lot of different things that ran through my mind. But, yeah, that's a good question. But like I said, I don't know that I've come up with a full answer on that yet. But, you know, we're traveling down that road.
I think it is important to recognize the inherent racism in the system in terms of drug laws and housing. Ben Carson, by the way, just removed the discrimination from HUD today, which I'm deeply offended by that. That we have to recognize this, that in order to get everybody on the same page, is that we have to say, we treated this population different than we're treating this population. And by the way, we're going to treat you all fairly now. There are several things, though, is that there was more violence associated with crack, and we talked about that earlier, because when crack came out, basically the federal government said, you go ahead and do that and shoot each other up. There was if you read Dreamland, the Mexican cartel that brought heroin into Ohio told the dealers, no guns, no violence. And so you're seeing more violence now from it because there's more entities.
There's more competing competition.
And especially with the fentanyl. But so there is that reason. One, too, is cocaine is a stimulant, so there's more propensity to violence when somebody's high on cocaine than with an opioid as well.
Yeah, one other thing, Ann, your drug dealer is much smarter these days. Mm-hmm. You got YouTube, you got all the social media, much, much smarter. A drug dealer does not let you come into his house and leave with drugs. You get high in here, so that way when you leave, even if you're an undercover officer, narcotics officer, you can't take the drugs out of here. So when you're gone, you're just a high person on the street. So they're much, much smarter than they used to be.
And they're giving out needles and they're giving out Narcan with the drugs because they don't want the addict dead because they lose a customer that way.
And can be also charged and
It's
convicted.
a business.
Yeah.
Okay, I have another question. I think Bela touched on it a little earlier, but I'm going to share it. How do we all attack this epidemic together across all sectors, whether it be arts, housing, healthcare, nonprofit industries, universities? And this question comes to you from Steve from the Y. How do we do it together?
Steve, we should just get coffee and I can help you with this.
Yeah, can I go with you? I'll get some coffee.
And I have to share, that was echoed by a college student here from Denison University. She says, how do we as college students begin to lift up the issue and get more involved proactively? That's from Sarah at Denison.
Well, I think we get all the stakeholders together, and I think we also look at who is being impacted by it and how do we get their basic needs met. So, for instance, we have a lot of homeless shelters here in Columbus, but we don't have what we would call a harm reduction. So we have a whole new population of homeless, which are younger and using. They're not going to go into the regular shelter because they can't bring a needle and they can't bring their drugs in. So they'd rather stay in a camp or stay in an abandoned house or stay together for safety, especially if they're young. So there needs to be a recognition on all levels. Are we meeting these addicts where they're at, and are we giving community support through clergy and for families and for primary care doctors? Now, I said I got 16 years sober tomorrow, and my doctor still says to me, I've had him for 20 years, Bailey, you're not drinking, right? Are you still not drinking? And I'm like, yeah, I'm still an alcoholic, doctor. It hasn't changed because there's not the education there. And that's also including working with libraries, putting social workers in libraries, putting people, making sure Narcan is available in fast food restaurants because we are having a lot of overdoses in fast food restaurants, in schools.
I get, Bella's absolutely correct on all of that, but I tell you what, there are a lot of people who are on these campuses who know that their friends are using. You know it. You know they're using, and I think that a lot of times we're afraid of what's happening, so we don't say anything, but, it's just like terrorism. See something, say something. You have to decide. We have to decide to either come together collectively, or we're gonna, if we don't stand for something, we'll fall for anything. And I think that a lot of times we tend to say, well, you're too young to work on this, or, hey, just kind of do social media for us. That's what we need you to do, as opposed to bringing you to the table, because I'm 51 years old tomorrow. And guess what? I don't know what's happening out there like you do as a young person from Denison. Mm-hmm. Wherever you are, just as a side note, I'm finishing up my dissertation, so you can come help me as a study student.
Yeah.
out
Thanks
there.
for the offer.
Yeah.
And to echo Cornell is being blunt. You know, so if you're a student and you think your classmate, your fraternity brother, your sorority sister, whoever it is using, have that conversation. Say, you know, I'm not judging you, but here's what I want. I want you to live. This is where you can get Narcan. And there's no judgment. So at the YMCA, we are harm reduction. We're not going to kick people out for using. We're going to get them the help. We're having a public training soon, I think towards the end of the month, couple weeks, is it just to say, hey, I want you to be alive. And you can deny whatever. I don't care, but this is what we do.
And talk to local EMS, wherever they're at. Find out what on your campus or anywhere is anyone doing. I mean, I'd go to the president of the university. How are we handling people with overdoses? Do we have any clinics here on campus, close to campus, whatever we can partner with?
Cornell Lewis, one more question, sir. Working with such heavy and at times negative work that you do, what do you do to stay positive? What do you do for self-care? This is a question posed from Felicia in Florida.
Wow. First of all, there is such thing as compassion drought. Our medics go through it every day, and some are just plain tired. Nurses go through it, doctors go through it, compassion drought. To be honest with you, it's affected me in a great way. I think helping has helped me to be helped. You know, I've been able to actually see people go to treatment and get clean, and that is huge. Our people on the street, all they want to know is, hey, did they get any help? Report the numbers. That's what helps, but for me personally, if it wasn't for the grace of God, you know, I don't know where I'd be, and that's me personally, so yeah.
Thank you, and happy birthday.
Right, happy birthday.
You gonna sing to me?
You don't want that. Bayla, what do you do for self-care?
Well, my wife is sitting over there. You can ask her, like, I think just what I learned in my you know, in recovery was I have a sort of a spiritual idea that I try to abide by. I have my kids. I write. I try to run, you know, at least 4 days a week. I try to have a creative outlet. I talk about it. You know, I talk about work. I talk about the frustrations. And oddly enough, and I bet Cornell probably maybe feels the same way as I do, it's not always the addicts that are the most bothersome that I take home to work. It's the system. It is seeing something that the intention is good, but it's so dysfunctional at times. And how did we get here? And how can we solve things? And I want to say that the city is doing a lot. We have Amy O'Grady now, who's the addiction policy director for the city. So trying to pull all these entities together. But, you know, I think community and talking about it is really, really important.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's it. I think that's a wrap, people. Bayla Co-Compactor, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for asking. Thanks.
Cornell Lewis, thanks to you as well. Had to say it one more time. Thank you.
Well, that was fantastic. And remember, they talked a lot about Narcan and naloxone. Those are the same things. And Mount Carmel is going to provide up to 80 kits to you. So we'll talk about that later. But there's free training. Stick around after, probably around 8:15 or so, and Tia Moretti will be talking about that in a little bit. So now I'd like to move to the second portion. So we have three I told you about. Now we're moving to the second portion. And so I'd like you all to note your programs before each of these speakers, because we wrote a little, they give us their bios or whatever. But for the most part, we wanted to tell you why we selected these speakers and help put it into context. And so the next speaker is going to be Kay Wilson. And I think you're going to pick up on a theme, at least with two of our speakers, that our youth need better role models. They need better mentors. They need more leadership around them that's positive. And that is what Kay is going to bring to the table today. So Kay, I think you're walking down here. I'd like to give you the stage now. And
I was born with two incredibly big black eyes. At least that's what my friend Rhonda Norman said when she heard that the Weebles just brought home a little girl. Heroin addicted and shaking, coming from Nationwide Children's Hospital, I wasn't allowed to go back home with my biological mother, but I was fortunate enough to be cared for by a nurse that was also a foster mother. As a young person, I struggled with my self-image and finding out where I belong. Often dismissed because I was adopted by a white family. And I remember as a little girl going through my elementary school and looking at a sheet of paper that had rows and rows, and you had to pick the image that didn't belong. I was that image. Often dismissed because I was rescued from what I could have been. Not looked at or valued because of who I was, but I was that exceptional black girl because I was adopted by a white family. My mother, my foster mother, motivated me to be driven because often people couldn't understand there's no way that you could be a racist and adopt a black child. Sometimes derogatory words and racial slurs were given a pass. Often motivated and then driven from a molestation from the youngest of my older brothers, trying to find my value in my voice, often looking to try and find love, and I thought I found it. I was married, it was electric, it was volatile, trying to figure out what was for better, for worse, because nobody ever tells you what for worse is. Bruised, burnt, and sometimes broken, and at one time left to die. But God decided that it wasn't my time. I had an opportunity to be blessed through my marriage to go over to a beautiful country in Nigeria. I was blessed with two incredible boys. And I have the opportunity every day to wake up full of excitement because I have the opportunity to serve young people. I try to be to them what I needed as a young person from an adult. I try to be the light. I serve with an organization called LeaderSpark, where we ignite the power of leadership in young people. In 2017, we had the opportunity serving just over 1,000 young people. We served in 12 Central Ohio high schools and also at Franklin County Juvenile Detention Center. I also am blessed to serve with an incredible community action agency called Impact Community Action, where they help young people, where they help all people so we can work with families in order to get them to self-sufficiency. Columbus is an incredible place. I see people who are in this audience who are blessed because they believe in Columbus, and more importantly, they believe in social change. I work every day to see young people. I see them. I work to hear them. Because oftentimes we look at young people and we judge them and we say, what's wrong with them? Instead of just asking what might have happened to them. So in having the opportunity to serve with an incredible nonprofit, to having the opportunity to do what I do, I'm hoping that we leave tonight. And I hope that as I stand here, that you don't see me as an exception. Because I am one of those broken children. And yet, it was people like my father who unrelentlessly believed in me, who sowed into me, who was an example of the light to me. My two incredible boys who show me every day that it's worth waking up for, to try to be a better example. And I'm here to ask all of you, see yourself in youth. See you in youth. Find that young person that you can sow into. Believe them and do it with the same veracity that somebody believed in you. Because you could be the difference. Because imagine, what if somebody didn't believe in you? What if they didn't take time to light you up? Where would you be? So I ask you again, see you in youth. Thank you.
Good job. So, Kay, how can the community help you?
Well, if you have your smartphones, if you're interested in being a mentor to a young person, to work with LeaderSpark, with Impact Community Action, I ask that you text Storytellers to 41444. If you are interested in sowing a seed, maybe instead of getting 2 slices of Mikey's Late Night Slice, maybe you get 1. You can donate for an app that we're trying to develop for young people to be able to have leadership skills in their pocket. You can text Test City to 91999.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you very much. Thanks. Yeah. And another point I want to mention is that each of the speakers has a table out front with their contact information and other details. So if you saw something that moved you, please help them out. Next up, we're going to hear from Staley. And I encourage you to learn everything you can about this next speaker and what she is up to, because it's like mind-blowing in so many different ways on a creative level, as a creative director, her vision for what she's doing with Prism Magazine, and of course who she is as a person and her own radiance, which you'll witness today. I first saw her speak on a panel, I think it was Honoré Scherer exhibit panel about like women and strong women at the Columbus Museum of Art. And it was the first time I had ever even heard of Staley, and I just saw her speak, and I was like, oh my God, she's like an amazing speaker, and like the story she's telling, she's like so riveting. I hope that you enjoy it, but she has a very powerful story and message to share, and I'm very hopeful that folks in Columbus really start to embrace everything that she'll be talking about today. So Staley?
Am I on? Yes. You can hear me? There I am. Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me. Who here has ever been to Disney World? Give me a show of hands. Excellent. Who here has ever gotten to meet the great mouse himself? Show of hands. Anybody? Really? You're missing out. Well, if you know anything about the actors who play the various famous Disney characters throughout the parks, you have some idea about the strict level of training and policy that goes into those actors' roles and what they are, what they're not allowed to do while performing that bit. What I find interesting is the perfect example that illustration becomes, a perfect parallel when articulating what life can be like for a closeted transgender person. So I want you to think about it. Imagine your life right now, unchanged, but living it out inside of that mouse suit as part of your daily reality. So if you think about it, you know, you have this established brand as Mickey Mouse, and you learn to normalize walking into a room with this bit that you perform. And every gesture kind of pertains to that illusion and therefore keeps you safe and employed and kind of part of the institution. But every hug that's otherwise well-meaning is actually barricaded by these big felt foam hands. And the smile that the world sees is plastered on in plastic and not actually yours. So what would happen if you decided to dismantle that costume while at a Disney park on the clock? What screams of horror would you hear? What immediate consequences and what resulting loss? Well, certainly employment. But what about the reality of the way that people had come to see you in that role? What about the identity that they had assigned to you and what that meant to them? Would it be too much for you to break their hearts? Would you instead choose to stay in the mouse suit, to make those around you happy, or to keep your job, or maybe just for the sake of personal security and safety? How hard would that be for you? How long before you would want nothing more than to lift off that mouse head and pull off the gloves and have some real skin-to-skin contact and just be the actual person that was always inside of that so-loved mouse suit? This is an example that I like to give in my talks to help people understand the frightening reality faced by a lot of trans people in our world today. Now, I could easily fill this 8 minutes with staggering statistics and educational data pertaining to the trans experience right here in Central Ohio. Facts like according to the 2015, it's not there, there it is. According to the 2015 US Transgender Survey, Ohio report, 91% of respondents reported that all of their IDs do not reflect the name and the gender that they prefer. And that's a major identity issue. Or we could step outside of Ohio and recognize that according to data provided by Planet Transgender, internationally, a trans woman is murdered every 29 hours. A report filed by Transgender Europe documented 226 trans murders between October of 2013 and September of 2014. Are these happening? I hope so. I want you to take a look. Sorry. Well, were my portraits up there? Someone help me out. I want you to look at their faces, okay? These are people, these are women who died here in the US. These are my sisters, and I want to make it clear that I don't see them as an anecdote or slideshow to my speech, but I see them as the reason that I'm here and the reason that I do what I do. So tonight, I don't want to speak to you exclusively about stats and data. Instead, I want to talk to you, instead I want to talk to you simply about transition and how this is a normal human experience that everyone in this room shares, everyone in the world shares. Now those stats, those facts and data, they are so important to realize that the rate of murder against a cisgender person, against a trans woman, currently is 1 in 12. And for trans women of color, that number rises to 1 in 8. Or the fact that the average life expectancy of a trans woman of color is 35 years old. How old are you? Think about it. But we all experience transition in our life. And if we're going to start understanding the walks of these people from such a marginalized, disenfranchised kind of group, it's important that you be able to relate to them. So tonight, this is what I want you to know. We each face transitions in our life based on our God-given need to be authentic, and taking personal responsibility for how we respond to those transitions consequently affects the people and the culture around us. Growing up, the youngest of 2 in a conservative, white, Christian, Midwest, single mother home, I was the artistic, flamboyant theater kid who heard the word faggot likely every day of my life from elementary school through college. My following goth phase after college provided me some cathartic relief as I was able to wear fishnet or eyeliner without completely abandoning the, at the time, male gender identity that I went by, although I did quickly transition into the gender nonconforming or non-binary self-appointed title of unicorn. I told people I was unicorn. And that way I kind of let go of all the gender roles altogether. But ever since my earliest childhood memories on God, I just knew that I was a woman. While I think the people in my life meant well to help me, being gay was the only language that they had to help me understand what I was going through, but never once in my life did I ever honestly identify or believe that I was a gay man. I knew at least that much wasn't accurate, but the only examples that I had of trans people to understand were Jerry Springer or Sally Jesse Raphael, and whatever very poor and rare representations of trans folks were presented in media or film. So, like many others in my community, I just had to learn about it for myself and figure it out as I went along, making a lot of mistakes along the way. But I did the best that I could. Finally, in 2013 through 2014, I started living as full-time female, and then finally took legal and medical steps to officially transition in late 2015 through 2016. But that is also problematic, because if you're looking for when did you, when I was born. When did I decide? I didn't. When did I choose to take off the Mickey Mouse head? 2012. When did I actually take it off? 2013. Do you understand? I hope you understand. Thank you. So since that time, since I did transition, many in my life have put their walls up to me or walked away altogether. But I also have such a wonderful group of new best friends, some who are in the room here tonight, and a wonderful new community of chosen family. I have gone from homelessness and poverty to bountiful employment. My boss is here, who I love so much. Bountiful employment and making a positive difference in the world around me. I have learned to recognize and can testify personally to the white and male privileges, the male privilege that I lost when I transitioned and the white privilege that's kept me alive, likely, this long. And in doing so, I've had the honor of being exposed to many different people groups of intersectionality that I otherwise wouldn't have known, or that I can now work alongside, and I can use my platform to make a difference for. And I'm so grateful to them. So you could say that I've transitioned in a lot of ways. I've transitioned from shame and hiding to a new self-acceptance and strategic vulnerability. I've transitioned geographically from New York to Los Angeles and now back to my roots here in Columbus, Ohio. I've transitioned politically from conservative to liberal, Whitney. I've transitioned emotionally from fear to operating out of love. I've transitioned religiously or spiritually, I've transitioned from religion to just a relationship with God. And I've transitioned personally from weak to strong. Now those transitions were not without sacrifice and doubts and a lot of lessons learned along the way, and who couldn't relate to that? So I want to ask all of you, what transitions have you experienced in your life that have shaped you? Divorce, loss of loved ones, career changes, battles with cancer or other diseases, they all apply. For us to make a positive difference in our communities, it's time that we recognize the bridges that we have shared through transitions in our life from one point to another, even if we've landed on opposite sides. That intentional choice to empathically recognize other people's struggles cultivates essential honor and respect as we choose to listen to each other's stories. And it's why you guys chose to come here tonight. I believe, and I have seen, that in those intersections, in those waiting rooms, on those bridges, however brief, we can begin to plant the seeds of meaningful relational equity. Allow me to ask you the following takeaway questions. Number one, what is your ideal self, and why are you afraid to go after it? Number two, who do you want to be, and what transitions need to begin or need to happen in order for that process to begin? And number three, what lies around your identity belief system need to be rejected, and what truths need to be embraced? I'm going to leave those up in case you want to take a picture, and you should. From the bottom of my heart, and with all of the love in the world that I could ever feel for all of you, I encourage you to start your transition. Walk in the light. Be kind and authentic, because in your kindness and authenticity, you will cultivate the strength to overcome, change the world around you, and be free. Thank you.
Quick round.
Oh, okay. Bring me on stage? No.
Okay, so I think it's important that each of these moments we just take a second to figure out how the community could actually help you and help.
Mm-hmm. He told me not to go back on stage, but I'm like, no, I'm going to get my light. Yeah, so how the community can start helping the trans community right here in Columbus, Ohio, is to support local organizations like Trans Ohio in particular. There are opportunities at Prism Magazine where we are telling these stories. There are places like Equitas Health that provide all kinds of screenings, and Mosaic is a wonderful group that Equitas backs up that Prism has partnered with. And it takes money to provide these services, and it takes going to educational classes like Black in the Day that is often run by queer, usually trans people of color, or gender nonconforming or gender non-binary people of color. Getting to know the trans people in your environment. Some will choose, and this is what I like to say. Even statistics and data like what I presented tonight are actually tricky to gauge as Bible For what we have, those are accurate numbers, but there's always more trans people than are willing to come forward. There are plenty of trans people that assimilate into cis-normative society. We call them woodwork girls, and they just sort of pack up their life and disappear. You know, they move and they change their name and get whatever done they need to do, and it's because housing, employment, healthcare are all such a risk for them. So that is how you can actually help, is to donate your money, to volunteer, to get involved, to go, it's more than just going to Pride and supporting your, queer friend. Go to the Trans Symposium that's coming up this summer. Encourage trans friends to go to the job fairs that are happening in Columbus, things like that. But it takes, and this is from the bottom of my heart, I know I'm going over my time, but for the men here who are trans-attracted men who find themselves attracted to trans women and are afraid of the judgment that they're going to experience. Imagine what we experience as we walk out every day. So if you hear your buddy making that joke about Caitlyn Jenner, tell him to knock it off. If you, thank you. If you hear comments from women, if you notice a trans girl in the bathroom and you hear the giggles or the snark, support her. Show that wonderful female camaraderie that we can so often share in the bathroom, am I right? Be an active part of shifting this culture through kindness and authenticity.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you. All right, folks, so thanks for your patience tonight with the parking situation and how we needed to wait, but as you can see, the room is much more full now than it was at 6. So we have one more speaker, and then we're going to take a 15-minute intermission. I'd encourage you now to go ahead and fill out that census card and hand it to us on the way out, just so that we have all your details and that you weigh in on the next event, which we're looking at December, probably coming back here to the Garden Theater, if they'll have us. Okay, so with that, not every neighborhood is the same, and we didn't all grow up by the same people around us. I grew up in a suburb of Columbus, and I had all sorts of role models around me, not that I paid attention. But for our next speaker, growing up in Northeast Columbus, he grew up with role models who were drug dealers and rappers and sports stars, or at least that's what they aspired to be. And so he's going to share that with us. And again, I noted earlier that youth was a topic tonight. So this next speaker is going to talk to us about youth. And I'm super excited for you guys to hear Veda. Make sure you Google him and check him out on YouTube as well. He's got some really killer tracks that he probably won't talk about. Veda, come on in. Yeah, I was going to bring that up.
How y'all doing? I don't know, am I allowed to ask everybody how they doing? Is that okay? Okay. Give it up for the other speakers that came up here before me, please. That's a bright light. So one of my favorite musicians of all time, one of my favorite poets of all time, Gil Scott-Heron, wrote a poem titled Running. And the beginning of the poem starts, because I always feel like running, not away, because there's no such place. Because if there was, I would have found it by now. Because it's easier to run, easier than staying and finding out you're the only one who didn't run. When I first heard that poem, I fell in love with it because up until recently, that described my life perfectly. I remember when I was a real little boy, I spent a whole lot of time with my great-grandmother in Mayberry, West Virginia. Mayberry is a very small town in West Virginia with a population of about 200 people. And my great-grandmother, she loved her garden. She had a garden, and she would work in it all day, and she would make me slave in the garden all day. And I loved her for that because she taught me how to plant and how to grow things. There was hills around where she lived, and I remember on nice days, I would run up and down the hills by myself, and I would run through fields and pretend I was animals and creatures and all kinds of things. And I remember the day my mom told me that she passed away. It was my first introduction to death, and it was the first time that I lost a best friend. My great-grandmother, was a very, very powerful presence in my life when I was little. Because there was a lot of things going on that she helped me deal with, some things like my parents, they were addicted to drugs. They were dealing with alcoholism. They were arguing a lot. So when she passed away, it hit me very, very hard. So you fast forward, and me, my parents, and my little brother, my little sister ended up in Columbus, Ohio. And Columbus, Ohio, here, was a very different place because it was more people, so it was a lot more people to judge and criticize you. I remember a little girl that lived next to us, her name was Tiffany. She lived in a yellow house. And I remember she came up to me one day and she said, "You know your mom's a crackhead, right?" I remember how that made me feel. I can't describe it in words, but still to this day, I remember how that made me feel. You know your mom's a crackhead, right? How was I supposed to answer that? So, also being in Columbus, Ohio, or once we got to Columbus, Ohio, my parents split up soon after that. So me, my little brother, my little sister, we remained with my mom. I'm going to paraphrase something that I heard somebody say before. It's completely logical for a kid to want to become a drug dealer if they walk outside and that's the only thing that they see. I grew up on the northeast side of Columbus, about 10 minutes down Fifth Avenue here. And it wasn't too far from Greenbrier Projects, which is now non-existent. They tore it down. It was also known as Uzi Alley. For those of you who don't know what Uzi is, it's a small machine gun. So I'm sure you can use your imagination and figure out how it earned that nickname. But anyway, so in 1997, my friend's uncle was responsible for a lot of the drugs that was moving in that area. And police, they were making random stops of vehicles going into the projects to try to make desperate drug busts. So my friend's uncle, what he would do is he would make us carry drugs in our school bags into the projects. And sometimes we would carry up to 1/4 kilogram of cocaine in our book bags. The first time that I did that, I was 11 years old. My grandmother didn't know about it. My mom didn't know about it. All I knew is that every time that we did it, he would give us some money. And to an 11-year-old, $20 is a lot of money, right? I can buy a lot of candy with that. A lot of Debbie cakes. I like Debbie cakes. So where I come from, it's suggested that kids believe that they can only become 3 things. We only have 3 options, right? Those options are you either play sports, you become an entertainer, or you sell drugs. And, I always had positive role models around me, right? There was the guys that worked at the rec center, there was coaches, there was positive role models around me, right in front of me, but for some reason, we thought in order to get out of our situation, those were the 3 things, those were the 3 tickets, those were our ways out, right? So, what I did is I did all 3. Because I'm thinking, I want to better my chances, right? So the second thing that I pursued, I started playing basketball in the 7th grade. I was naturally good at it. As soon as I picked the basketball up, I was good at it. I played for the middle school team. Over the summer, I played AAU basketball. Fast forward, in high school, I played for my high school basketball team. Over the summers, I played AAU basketball in high school. I was good enough where I was even offered a few basketball scholarships. And I didn't accept any of them. Now, why would I do that? Why would I turn something down if I feel like it was going to help get me out of my situation? And, I would like to say that fear was a big part of that. But I was running. I always liked to draw. I would watch my uncle draw, sit over his shoulder. I would annoy him, get on his nerves, my Uncle Ernest. And I was always secretly drawing. So in high school, I would draw a lot too. I loved going to art class. And my art teacher helped me put together a portfolio. I submitted it to Columbus College of Art and Design, and I was offered a scholarship. I took that scholarship. But one foot was still in the streets, and one foot was in college. Those are two hard things to juggle, right? So I ended up dropping out of school. I was running. So soon after that, a good friend of mine, or you can fast forward, a good friend of mine suggested that I take music seriously. I always loved hip-hop. I always was a big fan of the hip-hop culture. I remember I stole a tape from the corner store. The first tape I stole was DOC, No One Can Do It Better. Anybody here know who DOC is? Yeah. Okay, it's about 5 people. DOC is amazing, all right? But anyway, that was the first tape that I stole from the corner store. I loved hip-hop. I love rapping. I didn't take it seriously until my friend suggested, which was in my early 20s. Yeah, I'm older than 20. I've seen a couple of older women, eyes open. He's only 20? Yeah, I know, I look amazing. Right? I'm not a vampire either. I have a beautiful fiance, by the way. She's here, but sometimes I gotta keep her on her toes, so she knows it. Let her know that I'm a catch. But anyway, in my early 20s, I got serious about rapping. My friend convinced me, so I completely left the streets. I started to get serious about music. I even got a regular job, right, which killed me. But we started a group, and we called it Fly Union. It consisted of 4 of us. And we started to gain buzz locally. We started to get real known locally. Then that turned to statewide, and then we started to make a lot of noise regionally. And a little bit after that, we ended up signing a publishing deal to LeBron James's Spring Hill imprint. So that was a big deal. Literally, we signed the deal. We flew to LA, did a whole bunch of cool rich people stuff in LA. Then we stayed at the Peninsula Hotel and ate breakfast on the rooftop, and it was little plates, but they were $300. I was like, can we just go to McDonald's? I seen Sylvester Stallone, and he looked kind of real. And I remember being there, and I was like, is this, this is weird. Is this, what I want? And literally, we flew back to Columbus, and not too long after that, I left the group. I left the situation, right? And again, people are asking, so why? Why would you do that? These things are supposed to be your ticket I didn't, to be somewhere. I was running, right? So soon after that, I still loved making music, so I started, make music by myself as a solo artist. I became kind of successful as a solo artist. I was able to share stages with a lot of my favorite artists, Kendrick Lamar, Nas, some pretty big deal people. I also at that time started to write for artists too, so that was also cool. I became kind of successful at doing that. It was cool to hear songs that I wrote on the radio and on the TV. So I was doing that. And then also at that time, I think my great-grandmother's spirit caught up with me because I wanted to start working with young people. I wanted to help grow things, right? So I was doing that. I work for a lot of, different organizations here in Columbus. I won't run down all of them, but quite a few. So I was doing quite a bit of work in the community at that time too. And I think a part of me also wanted to find out, were the things or the options that I thought that my generation could only do, were those things unique to my generation? And what I found out that they were not. Even after having a black president, a lot of our young people still believe that those are their only options, that those are the only things that they can do. And everybody thought after Barack got in there, it was like, oh, it's over with, right? I love Barack Obama, by the way. It's a cool dude. It's a cool dude. Barack still walked like how we walked in the 90s. Like, he still walk like that today. Like, I'm gonna start walking like that. Like now, I'm gonna bring it back. When I walk down here, I'm gonna walk like that. But anyway, so they still believe that those are the only things that they can do. So I became very passionate about that work. So then I started to think about also, my fiance, she's going to kill me for saying that later on. But I started to think about when I was with my great-grandmother and when I was younger, when I was a kid and when I was innocent, and when I was running through fields. And I started to think to myself, we were all kids at some point in time. We were all children. We were all innocent. Everybody. The drug dealer, the drug addict, the white supremacist, the sexist. We were all children at one point in time. We have a white supremacist in here? You might want to keep that under wraps. Yikes. All right. But we were all children, right? We were all children at some point, meaning that we were all innocent, right? Society has to take some type of responsibility for how our children become. Society, meaning us, we have to take some type of responsibility for that. I hate when I hear people say, oh, well, where are their parents at? I hate when I hear that. Take my parents, for example. My mother and my father dealt with the same struggles that I dealt with. And the same struggles that I see kids coming from where I come from deal with today. I'm not mad at my mom for what she did. Actually, I'm very proud of my mom. I love my mom. She actually, she doesn't use drugs. She got a degree, right? I love my dad. I love my dad very, very much. I'm not mad at them because they were children just like we all were, just like some of us are. There's some kids in here today. We were all children, which means we all have the ability to change the way that we're thinking, right? And we have to allow our kids to grow up. We have to allow them to even grow up. Tyree King was a 13-year-old boy who was shot and killed by the Columbus Police Department on September 16th in 2016. I knew Tyree personally. I knew what kind of kid he was. No matter where you stand in that case, the one thing that you cannot deny or that you cannot argue is that he was a child. 13 years old. I need to gather myself for a little bit. I'm sorry. He was 13 years old. It could have been me when I was 13. It could have been some of you guys as kids at 13 years old. So what I did is I decided to enlist myself in the war for our children's imagination, because that's what it is. It's a war for our children's imagination. It's a war where the other side is telling them, kids where I'm from, that they can only be specific things. It's a war telling kids that are from areas that's not where I'm from that those kids can only be certain things. So it's a war on all children. Children of color and children of all races. So I decided to enlist in that war. So I wrote and I illustrated a children's book. And I did it in honor of Tyree, and it's called The Boy Who Tried to Touch the Sun. And I wrote the book to hopefully inspire as many children as possible, to get it in the hands of as many children as possible. Now, if you ask me, I believe it was something weird about why I didn't take full ownership of those opportunities that was laid out for me. There's a reason why I didn't do that. Because I feel like what I do now is what I am meant to do. This is what I'm meant to be. Just remember, we were all children. Hold on to your imagination, right? And because we're all children and we're all the same, I'm going to do a call and response, and I want you to repeat after me. I'm not going to do the whole thing. This is something usually my brother Walimu does. I want you to repeat after me. I am because you are. I am because you are. We're going to do that again because that was super weak. I am because you are. I am because you are. That's a little better, but y'all got a little loud. I heard you get louder than that earlier today. I am because you are. I am because you are. We getting there. We getting there. It's not quite there though. You're being very quiet. I need you to be a little louder, okay? We're gonna try it again, okay? How about this to give to, because this is about imagination, right? Let's imagine, because maybe this is help you give me a little bit more volume. Let's imagine that all the kids who didn't get to grow up, let's say it loud enough so that they can hear us, okay? I am because you are. I am because you are. There we are. I are because you am. I are because you am. And she's like, that don't sound right. That's not how this. You are because I am.
You are because I am.
I am because you are.
I am because you are.
You are because I am.
You are because I am.
Thank you. Am I supposed to leave? Are you coming up here today? Thank you, thank you. I can't see any of you because of the light.
All right, so I grew up reading Shel Silverstein.
I love, me too.
Unpack that for me.
Reading Shel Silverstein? Like you want me to unpack his work for you? Or you?
No, I mean,
Okay.
he was an African-American.
Right. He was African American. That's true.
Yeah. So didn't he cover these, wasn't the archetypes?
So Shel did cover these things. He did cover them, but also, I love Shel a lot, but also he had to kind of hide his messages too, as well, because I'm going to give you some history about Shel. All right. So a lot of people wouldn't touch Shel. They wouldn't want to put his work out, right? And it took a very radical woman, Ursula, right, to pick him up and put him out. This is the same lady that gave us Marie Sendak and Where the Wild Things Are, right? Okay. So she took a chance on him, but he still kind of had to. If you notice, in a lot of his illustrations, those characters also, they can be portrayed as as white characters, right? So that's the difference, though, too. So there was a study, the latest study that the Cooperative Children's Book Center released is that 28% of children's books that came out last year portrayed people of color, which that's a low number. You know what I mean? That number is low. 28% isn't, it's up, 2% from the year before. And the year before, out of the 26%, only, I want to say 9 or 12, a very low percentage was done by authors and illustrators of color, right? So that's a big deal. So, and I bring those stats up because it's not, like I said, it's not just about children of color important to see these type of books. It's important for all children to see these kind of books. So that's what I'm fighting for. But I love Shel, but unfortunately, we're still at a place now, today, where there needs to be more books, children's books preferably, because like I said, that's where we hone our ideas, and that's when our ideas start to grow. So we need more children's books that contain people
Where
of
can
color.
the community get one of these books?
I have them here,
Oh, okay.
so they can buy them here. Don't buy it if you're just going to buy it. Like, buy it and give it to a child. So like I said, we have it here. They're available on Amazon as well. And yeah, I mean, so if you really want one today, then
Cool.
they'll be here. Also, I want to say this. I do want to say this before. I'm sorry. We're all going to take up more time than what you want. But I visited a school the other day. I go into schools and I speak to kids and I read the book sometimes. And I did that the other day at a school on the south side. And I read the book, and all of the kids, they loved the book. Like, they were asking all of these deep questions about the book, and I got pretty emotional at it because they understand it. And the thing that hurt me the most is that I couldn't leave there and they all have a book, right? because we live in a capitalist society, right? So it's structured where it's like, I wish I could just give all of these kids these books. So if you want to donate toward, causes like that, where we take that money and we actually purchase books and give it to those kids, you can go to my website, vadaazim.com, VADAAZEEM.com. So you can donate there. If you want to purchase a book, you can purchase a book there. Also, I'm trying to get companies or people who want to sponsor schools, right? So that they can buy a certain amount of books and sponsor a school so that we can put books into the school too.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
Yep.
How's that walk? Okay, so I don't want to stand in between you all and like go into the bathroom and stuff like that. So come on back. We've got 2 more great stories and then our keynote presentation. So come on back and we'll see you soon.
Good evening. Can we all please take our seats? Can we all begin to take our seats? The program will begin in 2 minutes. We will begin the program in 2 minutes.
Please take your seats.
Okay, go ahead. All right, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Woo! Are you guys having fun? Where's Veda when I need that call and response thing? All right, so, real quick, I just want to thank the sponsors who helped us make this happen. I mean, sometimes these visions for like these ideas are so far out there that it's tough for sponsors to see any sort of reason why they would want to get involved. But a lot of people stepped up to make this possible and allow us to have pay for incredible production quality, which is like such an important thing for me when I ask speakers to spend so much time preparing and everything else, that we put on a great show. So with that, I really want to thank Ann and Michael Flaherty. Ann Flaherty is someone we've called Den Mom. She's been a part of my life for several years, always sponsoring our events and usually a part of them as well. She actually hasn't been to the past 2 events due to other reasons, but she's a huge part of it. The Better Business Bureau of Central Ohio, I know we've got some of their folks here tonight. They've been a huge sponsor for Startup Storytellers, and this was a tough one for them. This took a lot of real understanding and working with them to see how important it is for them to have a big role in the community and supporting these issues. And quite frankly, how the issues we're talking about today are business issues. And they really support that idea as well. Next up here is Compton Construction. I know Blake's in the audience. Always a huge supporter. Thank you so much, Blake. Equitas Health, thank you so much for your financial support. We appreciate it. And then we want to recognize, so we created this idea, my girlfriend had this idea of creating independent sponsors, like individual sponsors. So if you like what we're doing, we're kind of considering this nonprofit space or whatever. But if you like what we're doing and want to sponsor the next event, you can chip in as an individual sponsor. And so, we had several this year. We had 5 folks step up: Mackenzie Warren, Gwen Stetler, the Unitarian Universalist Justice Ohio, and Jenny Logan. And one more, Christy Angel. And then finally, we have a fantastic network of partners. Many of you probably tried the High Poke, the little bowls, right? You tried those? High Poke is always a big supporter of ours. They spoke at our Startup Storytellers event. Mikey's Late Night Slice, of course. They also give us pizza for our events with our speakers. Both of those guys did. 301 Originals is here tonight supporting us. Mixed Media is doing all the live streaming for us tonight. Flick Image worked with us on creating a video. And then Porter Wright is also a big supporter of ours. Actually, my attorneys as well. If you guys need an attorney, go to these guys. And then Nurture, the salon, did all the hair and makeup for most of the folks. So with that, okay, back on with the show, but thank you so much to our sponsors. It means so much that we were able to not only break even on this event, but we have a little bit to start the next event, which will probably be December. Okay, so with that, I'd like to introduce and invite our next speaker to come down the runway. Let's call it a runway for Celeste Malvar Stewart. And many of you know that Columbus is, this fashion capital of the world, yet I can't find anything to wear. And so I think that the deal is there's a lot of fast fashion in Columbus. There's a lot of big retail stores that I would never even walk in, into some of these stores. And they don't really have great practices when it comes to like sustainability and stuff like that. And that's why Celeste's story is so important for us today, because she's doing so much work as an independent, sustainable fashion designer. So thank you very much, Celeste Malvar-Stewart.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, David, for that great introduction. I'm always intimidated by myself when I hear introductions like that. But as David said, I am an independent, sustainable fashion designer. And I have the guarantee that everyone in this room actually understands at least the main part of what I do. We understand fashion, right? Because we all wear clothes, or at least most of us do most of the time. And even this evening for this event, I'm sure most of us thought about, well, what do I want to wear to that event? Maybe there was that special dress that I've been wanting to wear, or that shirt that's all great for this cool crowd. Or some of us even know where we bought our clothes. Maybe some of us even went to go buy clothes especially for this event. But as an independent, sustainable fashion designer, I take us a little bit further, and I ask this type of question. Do you know who made your clothes? I'm not talking about a brand or a company. We've got some great corporations in the city. I'm talking about, do you know who actually, what person, what people actually made the clothing that you are wearing at this very moment? And some of you may think, well, who cares? Who cares who made these clothes? I look great. I feel great. They're fashionable. They were really affordable. But I'm here to tell you that when we know who actually made our clothes, there is this profound connection that occurs and makes them more than just fashion, makes them more than just clothing, and actually affects the way we feel when we wear them. And I know that that's sort of, an abstract way of describing clothing because it's a superficial industry usually. But I have this example, and to kind of give you an example of that connection, I realized this connection when I was just a child. This is a very touchy statement to make during this political time, but I am an immigrant. And I was born in the Philippines. Thank you. Thank you. I never got cheered for that before. But so I'm an immigrant. I was born in the Philippines, and I was blessed to just grow up with this great group of friends and family. They were always around. I was literally never alone. I was always with someone, playing with other kids. I didn't know whether they were actually family or not. Some of them may not have been. I didn't know. And I always felt loved, and I always felt like I really just belonged to this community. And one day, my family of 4 just uprooted and decided to move to San Francisco, California. And San Francisco, California, if any of you have been there, is this dynamic, beautiful, full city. And so we moved to this city, and we got there, and there were so many people, but we didn't really know many people, and the relatives we had didn't really have time to spend with us like we did in the Philippines. In America, we seem to have to find the time to spend with others or make the time. So I went from this culture of just having time to be together to having to make time and find time. So as you can imagine, as a 4-year-old, I felt very isolated. I felt very alone. I had culture shock. My parents had to go get jobs, which I don't remember them having jobs in the Philippines. I mean, maybe they did. But they left me with a babysitter who spoke American English that I didn't understand one word of. And I was going to start kindergarten. And this was a really special time for me. I thought, oh my gosh, yes, kindergarten kids like me. I'll be able to bond. I'll be able to meet other children. I mean, we don't even have to communicate, right? Kids, they just play. You don't even have to speak the same language. So I went to kindergarten, and I found that because I was so foreign, I was so different, I spoke differently. I dressed differently. I ate differently. I did everything differently. It made the kids shy away from me. And I also got teased a lot and taunted. And it was just a really very sad time for me. I remember eating lunch alone. You know, I remember this long table and all the other kids were over there. And I was eating my lunch, which I was very embarrassed about. It was rice and fresh vegetables. I just wanted a bologna sandwich like all the other kids. And I would play on the swings all by myself. And it was just a very, very sad time where I felt alone. I felt disconnected. We're talking about connection. I felt very disconnected. And I most of all felt very confused. I was confused about the idea that here I am in this place where we're supposed to be calling home. And I just didn't have a place for myself. There was no place for me. And so you'd think, to fit in, I would have asked my parents to go out and get, you know, some clothes from the Gap, because that's what all the kids were wearing at the time. But instead, I remember going home and I put on this very bright plaid pantsuit that my aunt had made me in the Philippines. It was insane. It was, you know, what kindergartner wears this? And I put it on, and it was this cotton suit, and it was crisp, and it fit me perfectly because my aunt had made it for me. It was fuchsia and bright pink and cobalt blues, and it had big white buttons that went down the center of the jacket to match the white lines that went through the plaid. And then it had these pants that just fit me perfectly, and then they exploded on the bottom, just like everything in the 70s did, right? Everything exploded down there. And so, of course, I wore this, and kids teased me even more, because what was I thinking? But what I instinctually knew is that this clothing, this article of clothing, this suit, this pantsuit, gave me something that nothing else could at the time, and it gave me a connection. It made me feel connected to my aunt who had made it. It made me feel a connection to that community that I remembered being a part of and being loved and being needed and being cared for. It made me feel connected to that feeling of safety, and it made me feel grounded. And most of all, it made me feel like me again, which was amazing. And so fast forward, and here I am now. I'm far from 4 years old. And I have been, for the last 25 years, working on creating clothing that has this connection, where others can experience this connection. And it wasn't until I moved here to Columbus, Ohio, almost 6 years ago from New York City, that I discovered that I could actually begin from the very fiber of what I make. And so now I begin here. Aren't they cute? I can't believe I begin here. I'm so lucky. But these are some of the animals whose fibers I use. I know all the animals by name whose fiber I use, and I allow their personalities to influence many of my designs. So I work with all these farms that are family run. One farm is 4th generation farmers, and they're within the Ohio area. My furthest farm is in Medina. And, sorry. And eating his lunch is Gandalf. I wanted to point him out because he is one of my oldest sheep. He was one of the first sheep whose wool I used. And now he's a little bit bow-legged from being a little bit older. But he is known on the farm as the gentle giant of the farm. And so it's just such a wonderful personality to capture. So I take these animals, and I take their fibers, and I felt them to create the cloth, the textile, that I then use to create my clothing. But whenever I want to add any color to their already beautiful tones, I use natural dyes. So I go around the Columbus area, and I forage nuts, and I fight the squirrels often for the nuts and flowers, and I also grow some in my courtyard in German Village. And I take these two very ancient techniques. One is felting with natural local fibers, and another is natural dyeing, and I combine them to what I hope to be modern and beautiful clothing. And this is one of my most popular pieces that I've created doing that. I know, you look at Gandalf and you don't think that. But so this is a more popular piece, and it's all hand felted onto a silk base, which is that flowy part. And I used cochineal to dye this piece, which is an insect from Mexico, and it's the only living thing that I use. They're dried, and it's an ancient dye. And then here's another piece where you can actually see the material more. And there's a piece outside today that has the same material. But the black part there is from an alpaca named Jetta Rose, and she's really feisty, so I wanted to use her on this. And some of the browns are from the black walnuts that I collect from around the corner from my studio. So, you know, you look at these pieces, and they're obviously high fashion, they're obviously couture. And I've had people come to me and say, Celeste, you know, your stuff is nice, but when am I going to ever wear something like this? I mean, you know, it's a couture gown. When am I going to wear this in Columbus, where you can wear it here in Columbus? But I appreciate this comment because it made me realize to share this feeling of connection with more people, I had to make my pieces more accessible. And so tonight I'm very, very excited to introduce my new ready-to-wear line to make my pieces more accessible to the public. And this is beautiful Courtney in one of my pieces, and it's hand-felted, and it's got Gandalf on it. So you see the little furry parts as Gandalf, and it also has a sheep named Chicken, and which confused my intern with a name like that. And then Marin, beautiful Marin, is wearing a piece where I felted the wool onto salvaged silk. So this silk was actually saved from going into landfill. And they're both dyed, naturally dyed in logwood. So, thank you. Thank you. So you can basically take these two garments and you can wear them out, hand them down, you know, wear them till you can't wear them anymore and throw them into the ground, and they're 100% sustainable. So they biodegrade into the ground. And so tonight, you know, you see these women looking beautiful, but they're not just in clothing, right? They're not just in fashion. Their dresses actually have a connection. And the connection comes through knowing who made it, me. And it gives them also this connection to the very fiber, to the animals, to the farm, to the land, to the community. And when you have this connection, this very profound connection, you can start a movement. And I believe that this city, this test city of Columbus, Ohio, has people like everyone in this room that on some level, you know that there's that special piece of clothing that you have a connection to, and even when you wear it inappropriately, it doesn't matter, because you have a connection to that clothing and you don't know why. Everyone here can be part of this really great movement right here in this great test city of Columbus, Ohio. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. David, do you want them up?
No. Oh. Okay, Celeste. 2 questions. Number 1, this big fashion city, Columbus, Ohio, retail. Like, how can they learn from what you're talking about here?
Well, they can learn by, you know, going to my website. I talk about sustainability a lot. I'm very concerned about keeping my carbon footprint small. But we can all learn by just being a little bit more conscious about what we're buying. So there are a lot of local producers here, from producers of fiber all the way to producers of clothing and, you know, artifacts. And I think that's, you know, you can tune in. When you don't know about something, you don't look for it. And then you know how that is? And then the minute that you find out about something, all of a sudden you see it everywhere. And that happens right here in Columbus. There are a lot of independent people doing great things like this that are sustainable.
Okay, so what are some specific ways the community can help you out?
Well, you can buy my clothing. That's a really specific way. On April 24th, my best friend here and partner, we're having a pop-up shop at the kitchen, so that will occur. And you'll start to see my pieces, because this is just the debut of my ready-to-wear. This is just a peek into my ready-to-wear. And you'll begin to see my ready-to-wear pop up in different pop-up shops. And I have a rep in New York, so you'll start to see it, and I'll be in Essence magazine next month. Thank you. And you can also, it isn't just me making sustainable pieces. When you go and you go to someone and you ask them to make something for you, or you even go to Salvation Army, we're holding on to that sustainable spirit. What we're doing is we're allowing the lifetime of that garment to be a lot longer than it would have been in fast fashion. So just try and keep everything out of landfills and allow it to keep circulating. And there's a connection that happens there as well.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
A true story, I assume none of you know me. I mean, I know some of you do, but I do so many different storytelling type of projects, and one you probably don't even know about was called 24/7 Creative, and it was a series of 20 videos. And actually, I saw Michael Bongiorno here as well. He was one of my subjects, but Celeste was my very first ever video subject. It's like how I learned how to edit video and stuff like that. It's kind of interesting how it all comes together. Anyway, okay, so I started off by telling you a story, about Columbus in the 1930s and 40s and 50s and 60s. And I talked about this idea that even then people were saying there's so much deep-rooted racism that's just cloaked, but if you actually look for it, or if you live it, then you're very well aware of it. And our next speaker, Elsie Johnson, actually wrote an op-ed in the Columbus Dispatch, which made me realize just how bad it really is in Columbus. And it's talking about institutional racism and just what it was like for her growing up in the South, but then coming to Columbus and people thinking there is no racism when in fact there is. And so we chose her as the speaker really to help highlight her story and the work she's doing. And I think that you'll find that she's just incredibly energetic, brilliant, smart, articulate, a writer, entrepreneur, visionary, but literally doing things every single day to take this issue on. And so, Elsie, I'd love to welcome you to the stage.
Here we are, my friend. All right, good evening, everyone. Okay, so those of you who don't know me may not know that I am not from Columbus. I'm actually from the South, which means that when I talk, I expect for people to talk back to me. So we're going to try that one more time. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. That is so much better. So that's my baby you hear crying about racism. It's fine. You may hear him a few more times throughout the show, and that's fine as well. So David, thank you so much for the introduction. As David said, my name is Elsie Johnson. I serve as the Director of Leadership and Social Justice Programs at the YWCA Columbus. And that's my boss. I just brought everybody that I knew. And I also am the founder of Zora's House, which is the first co-working community and event space for women of color right here in Central Ohio. Thank you. So when I was first asked to do this event, I spent the next several weeks really racking my brain to try to think about how do I explain why I feel that Zora's House is so necessary for me and also for our community. And I was having a really hard time, putting it into words. So a few days ago, I was driving down the street with my husband, and I was like, babe, Why do you think that spaces for people of color, spaces for women of color are so necessary in today's world? Now, him being the former president of the Black Student Union at his university, and also a preacher man, he immediately started to wax eloquently, and he shared with me the story of the black man nod. Now, I don't know if I'm allowed to really talk about the black man nod in a room full of white people, but we just gonna go with it. The black man nod is a nod from one black man to another, an acknowledgement, whether they see each other on the street or in a hallway, whether it's a stranger or a friend. It is this idea that from slavery to civil rights to Barack Obama to Ferguson to today, brother, I see you. And there was something so powerful about that imagery when he shared it with me. But at the same time, being a black woman, it just felt very masculine. And in some ways, that is really the story of black women in our country, right? The story of navigating multiple identities. What does it mean for me to be black? What does it mean for me to be a woman? And yet yearning, as so many of us do, for those moments where we can feel acknowledged, for those moments where we can feel seen. Yearning, as so many of us do, for safe spaces where we're able to bring our whole selves to the table. So that was something that I thought a lot about, because as I've gotten older, I've realized that those spaces are actually pretty far and few between. And as I've gotten older, I realized that when you don't have that space, you learn to choose. You learn to choose, who will I be today? Will I be black? Will I be a woman? Will I be Southern? Who can I be? What parts of my identity will be acceptable to this audience? What parts of who I am will be safe in this space? You learn to choose because you have no other choice. So I'll give you a couple examples from my own life. I did not feel like it was a safe space to bring my whole self to the table when, as a freshman at Duke University, I enrolled in 8 classes, and not a single one of them was taught by a professor of color. I did not feel that it was safe to bring my whole self to the table when I looked around in that same year. I realized that the people who worked on campus who did look like me were the people who cleaned the floors and served the food. And so I learned to choose. When I moved to Columbus in 2015, it did not feel like a safe space to be myself when I found out that in Franklin County, roughly 28% of the population is African American, and yet 75%, more than 75% of the folks who are served by our local homeless system are African American. It did not feel like a safe space to bring my full self to the table when I learned that there are neighborhoods in this city where a black child is 10 times more likely to die before their first birthday than a white child. I have a 1-year-old son, so I learned to choose. I learned to choose because I had no other choice. But all the while, I was yearning. I was yearning for that experience of shared experience, that kinship of being in a room full of women who knew intimately, like I do, the click-clack of beads in a little black girl's hair, and the hiss of a hot comb when it's just about to touch the back of your neck, who knew, as I do, the sting of your mama's voice when she asked, I know you are not outside playing in your church clothes. I yearned for spaces, for places for women who understood hand games in the parking lot, for women who understood jumping double dutch. I yearned for that community where I didn't have to explain who I was, I could just be. And because that community did not exist for me when I moved here in Columbus, I decided to create it. And so in February of 2016, I created a meetup group called Zora's Daughters. And that meetup group would eventually pave the way for Zora's House to open several years later. And our first meetup was actually a book club around Shonda Rhimes' recently released book, Year of Yes. And at that book club meeting, I thought to myself, this is how Zora's House starts, with a conversation about the power of Black women who are courageous enough to say yes to themselves. This is how Zora's House starts. In conversations about courage and womanhood and Blackness and personhood, this is how Zora's House starts in a room that feels like magic and smells like cocoa butter. Now see, if this was a room full of Black women, y'all would have really laughed at that joke. And so in that moment, you know, and since that time, whenever people have asked me, why is it so important that Zora's House exists, I tell them that it's important because I yearn for women who know intimately, as I do, the click-clack of beads in a little Black girl's hair, the sizzle of the hot comb at the back of your neck, the sting of your mama's voice when she says, I know you are not playing outside in your church clothes. And I remind them that Black men call each other brothers and Black women call each other sisters. And I tell them that there is a difference between segregation and congregation. And in the pursuit of joy, of laughter, of growth, of fulfillment, of impact, women of color need a place where they are allowed and encouraged to bring all of who they are. Thank you.
Who is Zora?
So Zora is after Zora Neale Hurston. Boom, see some literary nerds in the room. So really quickly, the reason that I chose Zora's House is because Zora Neale Hurston wrote during a time when there was still a lot of stereotyping around people of color, especially women of color. So the idea was what was called the politics of respectability. It was, we can dress as well as they can, talk as well as they can. If we can show white people who would otherwise call us, you know, nigger and this and that, if we can show them that we are just as good as they are, then we can earn our humanity. And Zora wrote about very imperfect women. Instead of writing about those very proper women who dressed the way they were supposed to and acted the way they were supposed to, Zora wrote about women who had sex and got divorced and cursed. And so a lot of people really thought that her work shed a negative light around people of color. But what was true is that Zora turned real life, real women, and real experiences into art. And I believe that that is what Zora's House is all about. So I think about those perfectly imperfect women and being able to celebrate them. So that's Zora.
Great, thank you. And how can the community help you and your mission?
So one of the things that we're trying to do at Zora's House is build a library that features voices of color, women of color, authors and artists and activists. We need about $10,000 to support our library for the entire year. And so if everyone in this room donated $10 to the library tonight, we would be about a third of the way there. If everybody donated $20, we'd be half of the way there. And so if you are interested in supporting, please share Zora's House with people that you know, women of color who might be interested. You can also support financially by going to paypal.me/Zora's House, or what's the one that all the young people use?
Venmo?
Yeah, that one. Zora's House on Venmo. Right. I asked my little sister. She was like, PayPal, that's so old. Don't disrespect me.
Great. Well, thank you very much for telling us your story.
Thank you so much for having me. Sir.
All right. So before we get to the keynote, we need these seats all filled and these seats all filled as well, and people to move up from the back if possible. So if you can stand up, if you're near the back, please help us out. Take a seat over here. That would be super helpful. Go ahead. And over here as well. Thank you very much. It just feels a lot better when you're telling a story to have sort of like a full group around you. And then can you go ahead and put the chair? And can you put a water up here? Can you hand me a Okay. Yep, that's good. Thank you. All right, the chair, huh? Well, I wasn't kidding when I said that the reason why we created Test City Storytellers was really because of this next speaker. And, you know, for me, David Brown, I've actually never even been able to get a ticket to the Harmony Project because it always sells out. But I do hear that if you're a male singer, you can actually just become a part of the choir pretty quickly. So I think maybe that's what I'll have to do. Getting some nods. But anyway, also, if you know me, when I meet with someone, I love to take notes when they're talking. Well, with David, it was like so intense. We were at Little Palace, and he was so intense telling me his story, and I was like, and it was nonstop that I just had to take it all in. And that's what I love about this guy. He is so present with you. And I'm sure everyone here could attest to that. He is there with you at all times. And you can feel that. You see it in his work. You see it in his passion. He's got so much charisma. Every photo we put out about this event included him in some sort of way because we're just such big fans. We know that you are as well. So without taking too much of his time, which he can take as much as he wants, I'd like to hand it over to David Brown.
if you don't mind, I'm gonna sit down because I spend most of my day on my feet. And I usually am, as my boys will tell you, I'm usually asleep by now. I get up at about 4 o'clock in the morning and I go to bed about 8 o'clock at night. So I'm up there like listening to all these stories and super inspired, but also trying to stay focused. So David, thank you for inviting me to be here tonight. And I feel such a responsibility because he introduced me as a radical something. And I don't remember what that was, but I know that I've never been called a radical anything in my entire life. And a radical unifier. And let's get real. For one white man to call another white man anything radical, it doesn't really carry a whole lot of weight. I mean, nothing against you, David, but let's just keep it real. So, I'm going to condense my story a little bit because we know it's a little bit later than we thought it would be, but I'm going to just try to kind of like get to my point a little bit faster, and plus my attention span is not the best in the world. What I wanted to talk about tonight was with a nod to Larry Smith. I don't know where you are, Larry, if you're still here, but with a nod to Larry Smith, 6 words, and that is the right place, the right time. And talk about how in my life there have been all these moments where I've been at the right place at the right time, and that I've been a beneficiary of that. But how I've also been at the right place at the right time and not been aware of it, and how I've also been at the right place at the right time and didn't want to be there because of what it meant that I had to do. So I'm going to tell you just 3 little stories that kind of all intersect and lead me to where we are in this room right now. The first starts in 2008. I was in Los Angeles and was working on designing someone's home in LA in the Hollywood Hills. You know, gay people were supposed to either be able to do hair or do design. And so obviously I can't do hair, but I knew my way around a couch, you know. And so I was designing someone's home in Los Angeles, and they were out of town for the weekend. And I had run of the house because I was working on it and was cooking out in the backyard, and I get a phone call. It was a 614 area code, and I'm like, oh, it's a Columbus peep. I'll take it, you know. So I answer it, and it was somebody asking would I be willing to come to Columbus for 3 months, September, October, and November in 2008, and to work on local politics, to raise money for local politicians, and to also try to use contacts in New York and LA to raise money from the coast to bring them to Ohio, and forgive me if you don't agree with my politics, but to turn Ohio blue. And so the invitation to work on local politics was, maybe, but to be in Columbus in September, October, November, which is the best time of the year, I was like, okay, I'll go. And so I came out and met a whole bunch of amazing people when I was here, and got to know these people that were running for office, and it was really an amazing experience. And I started telling people about this idea that I had of something that I wanted to kind of maybe try here in Columbus called Harmony Project. And most people were like, yeah, choir, how sweet, and I was like, yeah, it's more than that, but thank you. And then the night of the election, the night of the Obama election, I'm at the Renaissance Hotel, and there's a couple of thousand people in the room. And I'm standing there, and I'm thinking about going back to Los Angeles. I'm thinking about what I'm going to do next. I'm thinking about this and that. And up on the screen, the state of Ohio shows up, and it turns blue on the screen. And in that moment, they announce that the number of electoral votes that Obama received for winning Ohio put him over the top, and that we had just elected Barack Obama as our next president. And in that room, again, if you don't agree with politics, just let me have my little memory here. We were crying, and we were hugging each other, and we were overwhelmed at the emotion that was in that room. And I knew in that room that I was in the right place at the right time to experience this historic moment. Go back a little bit to 2001. I am at Madison Square Garden. How many of you in this room know who Byron Stripling is? Do you know Byron Stripling? So Byron Stripling is in a band, and I'm behind the band, and behind me is a 400-voice choir. And we're waiting for this announcement, and we're at Madison Square Garden, and it's packed. And they announce, ladies and gentlemen, and the music starts, and I have to get the choir going. And they're, Michael Jackson. And the choir starts singing, let's dance, let's shout, shout. Shake your body down to the ground. You know, we're just loving it. Michael Jackson walks out. The whole place starts screaming and everything. And I'm like, I'm in the right place at the right time. This is the most amazing thing ever. And then Michael Jackson grabs the microphone and goes, I have laryngitis. I won't be singing tonight. And I'm like, now, since I'm in a room full of friends and since I'm not at work, I can use the language that I like to use, that my boys hear me use all the time, and I'm going to be myself. And I'm like, fuck you, Michael. This is Madison Square Garden, and I've got a 400-voice choir here to back you up. We're going to sing with you. And so we just kept singing because I'm like, eventually he's going to give up, and we're going to win. And eventually, Michael Jackson gives up and turns around and at least gives us one line of the song so that we could say, we sang with Michael Jackson. So I was in the right moment at the right time. Another great right moment, right time was 1998. I had been living in New York for 8 years, working for Marble Collegiate Church, even though I just dropped an F-bomb. Yes, I worked for a church. And in those 8 years, they had hired me to start a youth and children's program. And then as time went on, my job and responsibilities grew. And in '96, I had gone to my boss and asked if I could start a community choir. Because the choir at the church, at most of the churches in Manhattan, are all very high church, you know, holy, holy, that kind of stuff. And that wasn't really my kind of music. And I asked, could I just start a choir that is made up of just everyday people? They don't have to audition. They don't have to even be able to sing. And he goes, well, what if they can't sing? And I was like, well, that'll be my problem. I'll figure that out along the way. But I just want to include everyone that wants to be a part of it. And so he gave me $500 and said, sure, you can start a little community choir. 2 years later, that little community choir was over 100 voices. We couldn't fit everybody into the sanctuary, and he allowed me to rent Carnegie Hall for our concert that year. And we didn't know how we were going to pay for it. We didn't know who was going to show up. We didn't know if it was going to be good or not, you know, because, I mean, it was just a bunch of community singers. There's no audition process. You get what you get. But standing on that stage in 1998 with those 100 singers behind me and a packed house of 2,800 plus people in the audience was a moment that really kind of changed the way that I thought about music and changed the way that I thought about choirs, and ultimately planted the seed for what would begin here in 2009 called Harmony Project. As I was standing on that stage, and Arthur, my boss and mentor and father figure, came up, and he had me look up into the rafters and see all the people that were there. And if you've ever dropped by our office and you're invited to, there's a photo on the wall of that moment that was captured in time. And he said to me on stage, look what you did. And I remember turning to him and I said, look what music did. Because we all had the music in common. We all wanted to come together. But in that night, I realized that music could be more than something that was just entertainment and inspiring and moving and motivational. Music has a superpower. And when you access it, it can actually build community and make things happen that you could not believe would happen. But in that whole idea of being in the right place at the right time thing, there's also the other side of it. There's being at the right time in the right place that you don't always understand what's going on. In 1985, I was a pretty broken 21-year-old. I had recently been outed by someone who had seen me at a gay bar, because I'm from the South, and in the South, people always drop the words that they don't want to emphasize. You know, oh, she's Jewish. Oh, he's black. Oh, they're gay. They're poor. You know, so I fit into that category suddenly in my own family. And I had been outed, and my whole world felt like it had kind of collapsed around me. The secret that I had lived with for my whole life that I thought everybody could have figured out, but it's amazing what people will ignore if it serves their own purposes. And so I needed to get away from Louisiana. And I was running away from a family who would not accept my reality, a community and a church who were condemning my reality, and a therapy program that I had been put into to literally change my reality. And I mean, the red shoes and the skinny jeans and the hair and the way that I act shows you that that therapy program was very successful. Lots of good money spent on that one. But I didn't know where to go, and I didn't know what to do. But I had a friend that I had been in a singing group with, and I thought, if anybody will understand, she will. And so I called her, and I told her the story of what was going on. And she said, if you can get here, if you can get to where I am, then I will make sure that you're taken care of, and then we'll get you on your feet, and we'll get your life back together. And so on the Friday of Labor Day weekend in 1985, I hopped on a bus in Ruston, Louisiana, and 20-something hours later, I landed at the Greyhound bus station in downtown Columbus. And downtown Columbus was not what it is now in 1985, but it still seemed like this metropolis to me. And it seemed like I could be anyone here. I could be anonymous. I could just kind of be who I was going to be. And my friend, her name is Renda, my friend did what she said she was going to do. She helped me find community. She helped me get people around me. And 4 years later, I had gone back to college, and I was working at Bexley Methodist Church, and I taught at Bexley High School for a year. And I had developed this sense of family and community that I had been missing. And having that, of course, gave me courage and gave me the opportunity to think bigger, which gave me the courage to move to New York, which gave me the courage to then start my own choir at the church, which then, after I had the Carnegie Hall experience, gave me the courage to then leave the church and go out and start my own city choir in New York. So in 2001, I started this city choir in New York that was non-audition. Again, people were going, this is not the best thing to do, but I was determined to do that. And they came together, and it was people from every religious background and every culture, and all of these different things were coming together, but it still felt like I hadn't figured out what this was really supposed to be. And was it enough for us just to be coming together to sing? Did we really need to pat ourselves on the back for doing something that felt so obvious? So after 4 years of doing that, and after kind of coming to terms with who I was, finding myself, finding my own vibe, and knowing where I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to be doing, I decided to take a break from music completely, because I just felt like I was missing something, and I wasn't sure if what I was missing was actually related to the music and the choirs, or if it was something personal that I was projecting onto the choirs and the people who I was working with. So I gave up my little life in New York, which I thought I would never do. And I decided that I was gonna, pardon me, move back to Louisiana. And I thought maybe I could fix things, and maybe I could make it all better. And maybe I could finally have that family that I had always wanted to have, and maybe find the community that I had always wanted and longed for. And I moved back to New Orleans, and 3 months after I moved to New Orleans, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. And I stayed for the storm because I was a quarter rat. A quarter rat in New Orleans is somebody who lives in the quarter and doesn't believe that it's ever really going to be that bad, so you just stay. So while it might sound like I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, I was again in the right place at the right time, because in the days after Katrina, there was tremendous need in the community. And people were afraid to give their money. They didn't know if it was going to go to the people who needed it. They didn't know who was going to be helped and who was not. And so I started calling friends in New York and Los Angeles and asking them, would they please call these local little stores in Louisiana? Would they give their money there? And if they would, I would make sure that the cot that they bought that day was being slept on that night, that the nursing bra they bought that day would be delivered to the mother that night. And people responded because there was this immediate gratification thing, that we found a way to go from a negative to a positive. But I still didn't connect in my mind that that was what I needed to be doing, was getting people to serve. And while I was inspired by people's actions and what they were doing, I was also depressed by it, because I sat there and thought, it seems that we only rally and come together when there's disaster or trauma or something terrible happens, that's when we all go, oh, okay, yeah, of course we should help each other. And as I began to swim around in that, I was like, I need some space from all this to try to figure out what I should do. And I went out to Los Angeles at the invitation of a former Bexley student, actually, and got out there, and I started talking about this idea called Harmony Project. And it being Los Angeles, they immediately wanted to make it into a reality television show. And I got signed to some contracts, and I was in all these discussions, and I met all these different people, and they kept talking about how it was going to be, and how people would come in and audition, and they would get cut. And I would go, no, that's the opposite. Like, everybody's in, it doesn't matter. And they're like, yeah, but that's not good TV. And I'm like, neither am I. So what are we trying to do here? And they kept pushing me in this direction and pushing me in this direction, and I was a bit at a loss for what I was going to do, because I knew that isn't what I wanted. And that is the summer that the phone call came to show back up in Columbus and work on the campaign. So as I got to Columbus, nobody here wanted it to be a reality show, and nobody here wanted anybody to be cut. They all thought it was a great idea that if you couldn't sing, you could be in a choir. And so we put out an announcement in 2009 that said, if you love to sing, even if you've been told you can't, and if you want to be a part of something bigger than yourself, and then in smaller print it said free food and open bar. And a few hundred people showed up at what is now called Bluestone, but what then was called BOMA, the old First Baptist Church on East Broad. And from that, 100 people came together and started a choir, and by the time the concert happened 10 weeks later, there was about 86. Because my style is not for everyone, and nor is everyone else's style for me. Works both ways. But we presented this concert, and it sold out 2 nights, and it raised a shit ton of money for a local nonprofit, and it collected a whole bunch of toys. And I was like, really? I'm gonna, be patient with me, I'm gonna get to a good point. I'm gonna have to live in Columbus to do this? There aren't that many men's clothing stores here. Where am I gonna shop? Online shopping wasn't really a thing, in 2009. And quite honestly, I thought, this is really the whitest town I've ever lived in. I don't know if I can do it. And what? Accurate? Hello. But what I found was the people who showed up were incredibly diverse. And so it made me go, so there is something here. There's a hunger here. And maybe you just have to scratch the surface a little bit more to find it. It's not as obvious as a New York or an LA. But as I began to kind of get into this and it began to grow, then it was natural that it needed to kind of move beyond just this choir. So it moved into a transitional housing facility where people who had never been able to sing, who were sitting in the corners and rocking and silent and not communicating. And 6 weeks after we started the program, they're singing and they're rocking to the rhythm now, not to the own thing that's going on in their heads. And they weren't just rocking, they were standing. And they were raising their arms when they were singing with joy. And their social workers were telling us, I don't know what's happening, but it's good. And it's great to see this happening. And so then we went into South High School, where there were 26 kids who showed up. And on that first day, I said, tell me why you think we should come here. Tell me what you think the community thinks of you. And all they said was negative, 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 negative. And I said, okay, well then we can leave unless you want to change that. And they wanted to change that. And then we went into the women's prison and we began singing with those women. And it wasn't enough that we began to sing. We challenged everybody in Harmony Project and said, to have this experience, to go from being a non-participant and an observer to being a performer in a world-class choir that's going to make people jump up on their feet, and you're going to have these amazing experiences, you have a certain number of hours that you have to give back in the community. And so the connection came from Katrina, from Carnegie Hall, from all of that. It all came together, and it came together in a city where I had found acceptance and where I had found love and I had found community. And so it made sense to me that this is where I needed to build my own community. And so Harmony Project was selfishly started because I wanted Columbus to look like a city that I wanted to live in. And that meant I had to form my community around me so that it would look that way. And my community needed to have black, brown, and white. My community needed to have Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, atheist, Hindu, agnostic. Mine needed to have people who couldn't afford a bus pass and people who were CEOs making millions of dollars a year. It needed to have people who are doctorates and people who are struggling to pass the GED. It needed to have everybody in it, because everybody in it is the only way that I think that I benefit from it, is for us all to be connected, because that is what challenges me to step out of my truths and my comfort and understand that my truth is only mine and the truth of someone else is theirs. And for us to connect on those, we have to find a way to come together. So here's where it all kind of wraps up. So I thought that I had wound up here to start Harmony Project. And that's what the community kind of thought too. And I'm doing my Harmony thing, and then 2 years ago, on a night in September, I get a phone call that there's a student who's in trouble at South High. And I won't go into the details because it's irrelevant. And I spoke to the student on the phone and said, how can I help? And he said, I don't really know yet. But over the next few days, I found out what was going on. And then on October the 14th, which is my birthday, on 2015, I found myself in juvenile court. Now, to go from Carnegie Hall to juvenile court is a long journey. But I was in the courtroom, and the judge that day asked me, would I be willing to foster the young man who was sitting next to me, who I had known through our program at South High, but didn't know that well. And, you know, I took a breath and I just said, yeah. Well, first I turned to him and said, do you want to live with me? And he's here. He can tell you that I asked him that first. I didn't want to wish me on anybody. I had been single my entire adult life. And so I said, do you want to live with me? And he said, yes, sir. And so I said yes to the judge. And then a few weeks later, the friend who had been the one who had called also needed a place to live. And so I asked if he wanted to live with us. He answered yes, and then we went to court. And last May, our adoption was finalized, and we became this family. We became this unconditional family that doesn't really look like many others. We get stared at a good bit. We have some awkward moments occasionally. But to bring back to my topic and my thought at the beginning, when I was sitting in that courtroom and the judge asked me if this was what we wanted to do, I knew that that's why I was there. Not in just the chair, and not in just the courtroom, but in this town. And that was why I had gotten off that bus in 1985. And I knew it was why I had been in New Orleans to kind of see what I needed to do to create the organization that I needed to create. That while there were benefits to me being here, for me being able to create Harmony Project and pursue my career in this way, that the reason that I was there was to be in that chair in that room on that day. So when we're talking about social change, I want to challenge us to think that perhaps every place we are and every time we're in is the right place and the right time, and that if we open our eyes to what's going on around us, and if we don't necessarily know how, but if we're just willing to say yes, sometimes, even before we know how it's going to work out, that's what social change is. I don't have to change the world. I just have to change my world. And I have to be effective in my world. So my social change, where are the boys? Well, yes, I'm going to embarrass you, but you'll get me back later. So come up here for a second. Okay? Of course, your shirt is untucked the minute that you're going to come up on stage. Oh, my God. So, this is what social change looks like. It's that simple. It does not have to be a march, although we have to march too. It doesn't have to be shouting, although we have to shout too. Sometimes it's just 3 people deciding that they're going to defy odds and form a family and decide that they're going to be a family in society just like every other family in society. So I was fortunate that they chose to live with me. They are fortunate that I chose to live with them. We are fortunate that we live in a city where we can be a family together. And while everybody thinks that my entire world is all about Harmony Project is the social purpose that I think that we have together. But my social change is my family and the difference that we're making in each other's lives together. So thank you for having us here tonight. We appreciate it very much. All right, you may sit down. You done?
So our team would love to present to you our first Champion of Social Change Award and recognize all the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
For the Harmony Project and in your own life.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So how do you recommend we get started changing our own world? I mean, it's a simple concept, but.
Yeah, look, I mean, folks, there is nothing scientific or super duper smart about what I did. It's just finding something that people have in common. And this was music. It could be bike riding like Pelotonia. Pelotonia is about curing cancer, but ultimately it's about creating community. It's the same thing. We have to find ways to get people to connect. When Marble Collegiate Church hired me in 1990, and this is the liberal bastion of America, New York City. Well, San Francisco is really the liberal bastion, but New York's the second liberal bastion. When Marble hired me, 16 families left the church because they didn't want someone who was gay working with their children. And I was devastated. And I said to my boss, well, are you sure that I'm the right fit? And he goes, of course I'm sure. That's their problem. That's not yours. And he goes, but trust me, they're going to come back if they just get to know you. And it was the truth. We just had to have conversation. When I've been in so many events where I see white people freak out when the words white privilege come up, and they're like, oh God, and they get nervous, and they start to shake. What's going to happen? It's all my fault. It's all my fault, And it's like, just relax, just chill, and sit back and just hear. And just listen to someone else's experience and story. The only way that we get over our fear of each other is just by listening to each other's story or working together on a playground or planting trees together. Because when you're out sweating your balls off and you're doing stuff together, you're not getting into who you worship or who you don't or who you voted for or who you don't. You're talking about the kids that deserve this playground. And so it doesn't matter if you voted for him or her. That slide needs to be built. That tree needs to be planted. Those meals need to be served. And while I have my own political leanings, I'm going to work beside anybody who wants to get something done. So find what it is that you want to do. And it doesn't have to be big and it doesn't have to be dramatic. Mine just happens to be big and dramatic because there's 500 damn people singing on a stage and it's kind of hard to ignore a 500 voice choir. But find whatever matters to you and make it matter for you. It doesn't have to be a global movement for there to be change. It can be in your own house. It can be in your office. It can be in your own neighborhood.
Well, David Brown, thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All righty. So just a few quick acknowledgments. Remember, there's a free training for a naloxone kit, so I recommend that you stick around for that. Tia will start making her way up to the stage. I just quickly want to thank the team that pulled this together. I may be the person that is on stage tonight, but there's an entire team behind me that helped make all of this happen. So Jen and Juan and Katanya and Alex, and if they can all kind of come up and just take a quick bow as a part of this. Just the full team. Okay, maybe not. But anyway, I just want to thank them all for helping out and making it all happen. And also our photographer, Kyle Asperger. If you guys need any sort of event photos or anything, hook up with Kyle. And with that, I'd love to turn it over to Tia Moretti. Tia's with the Ohio Attorney General's office and just a really great consultant. We've worked together quite a bit in the opioid epidemic. Yep.
Apparently, I don't get the hand guy treatment, so I'll just fall down and die. So thanks for sticking with us, because this is a really special part of the evening to me. Really quickly, I have to do this. I'm a social worker, and before I was a social worker, I was a bartender in Chicago many years ago, and a lot of my friends were shooting up heroin. It's just what they did, and they weren't dying like they do here now. And I said, well, aren't you afraid of getting HIV? Because that's where I grew up, in a world where all of our friends died of AIDS. And they said, oh, no, we get clean needles and bandages and cookers and this stuff called naloxone just up the street. So I said, take me there. And it was a community house where you would walk in, you would get food, socks, clean needles. A counselor would talk to you if you needed that service, and you got naloxone. So naloxone is a life-saving drug. And as we talk about change today, I was so excited to see the law in Ohio be written so that we could hand this out to you today and make it as available as possible to save lives and change lives. When we talked all night about how you can change, make change in your world, the world, this is one thing that you can leave tonight with a kit in your purse, in your bag, and save a life if you need to. We are losing people, almost 2 people a day here in Ohio. And we hear everyday stories of walking into a bathroom and finding somebody dying. So if you can have one thing that can save a life, then I am glad to present that tonight. And through the generosity of the Mount Carmel Foundation, Steve Roth will come up and provide a quick 15-minute training, and you'll be able to walk out with a kit. In addition, my lovely fiance will be passing out the paperwork necessary to get a kit. So back in front, fill it out. And before we wrap up, I thought about tonight, and I wanted to say, I want to share this proverb that is an African proverb that I've used throughout my practice. And it said, the child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. So just let that sit with you for a moment and think about our communities. We were children in these communities, maybe not embraced. Our children dying in schools when they're killing themselves and they're killing each other, and on the streets when they're turning to drugs to numb the pain. They're burning our villages down, and we need to embrace them and everyone around us. So the one thing that you can do if you decide not to stick around for an naloxone kit is you can go home tomorrow and ask, how is your neighbor doing? And when is the last time we've checked on our neighbors without judgment? So thank you for sticking with it tonight. And here's Steve Roth from the Mount Carmel Foundation to teach you all about naloxone. And I need the hand guy to get me down.
Here. I will.
My gosh.
Everybody, wow, those are bright. So, hey, thanks for sticking around and getting a naloxone kit. We really do think it's quite important that people nowadays have these. I had somebody introduce me to a group at a library a couple weeks ago. It was a church, and she said we do a number of things to help people in our community. We learn CPR, we learn first aid, and she said now the third thing we have to get is naloxone because it's happening everywhere. Again, 2 people a day, and it's too much. So this training, it's going to take you longer to fill out that piece of paper to get it than it is to do this training. Very easy, very quick thing to do. So we normally do these trainings in cooperation with Franklin County Public Health, Coroner's Office, City of Columbus Public Health also. They help us out. So we're just going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about opioid, the names of some of the opioids that are out there, how to do hands-only CPR if you need to, and talk about the dispatcher, and then how to give this naloxone. So opioid and opiate are the same thing, if you hear that throughout this talk or anywhere else. Naloxone and Narcan, it's the same thing. It's kind of like Tylenol and acetaminophen. So here are the types of opioids over here. Obviously, the top two are not legal. Can you see this all right? Are not legal and are street drugs. The rest of them are all given legal prescriptions by physicians. And the fentanyl and carfentanil, fentanyl is 100 times more powerful than morphine, and carfentanil is 100 times more powerful than the fentanyl. Carfentanil is not used for humans. It's literally used for elephants and rhinos. And when you hear in a community that you have a rash of overdose deaths, like I think earlier this year, maybe last year, Columbus had 24, 25 deaths in a very short period of time. That's when carfentanil gets in a supply of drugs. And it's literally, I think, 3 micrograms of carfentanil is a lethal dose. So if you get any of that whatsoever, it's a fatal dose. So why naloxone? An opiate overdose, naloxone will only work on opioids, nothing else. No other drug will this help with. If you overdose on an opioid, it affects the breathing receptors in your body, and there's a little pictogram a little bit later that shows what that is. So if you do overdose, you take too much of that, you stop breathing, and that is the overdose. This one that you're going to get tonight is a nasal mist, and it's just like an allergy mist that you take every day. So I'll back up just a little bit. My history is I was a firefighter and a paramedic for 30 years, and I've worked for Mount Carmel for the last close to 20. And we work with the homeless and underserved. We go out to the homeless camps, and unfortunately, a lot of these homeless camps are homeless because of a drug addiction. So we hand this out to the camps all the time. So I've always said on the medic, naloxone is one of the most useful drugs and one of the most benign, because I could give this to myself right now and it would do absolutely nothing whatsoever. It only works on an opioid that's in the system. So here's this pictogram. So the little purple part is your brain. And on your brain, you have these receptors other places also, but the tall blue things are those receptors, and those receptors tell your body to breathe. So an opioid, heroin or Oxycontin, Vicodin, one of those, it gets on that, excuse me, it gets on that receptor, and if enough of those receptors are covered up by that opioid, your body stops breathing, and that's when you get the overdose. So you give naloxone, again, fantastic drug. You give that, it knocks that opioid off of the receptor, and the body says, I can breathe again. And that brings you back along, okay? So starts you breathing again. So the bad part, and I think it's probably the next one, what the bad part is, and it's later on also, is that this has a half-life. It only works for 30 to 90 minutes. So if that wears off, if it falls off those receptors, you can re-overdose again. So again, it is not harmful if there are no opioids whatsoever, and it will not do anything to any other drug whatsoever. So unfortunately, one of the problems is if people who are doing opioids, they could very well be doing other drugs also. If they overdose on those other drugs and you give naloxone, it's not going to do anything. It will only work on that opioid, all right? So one of the problems with it, it's not, I don't want to say it's as a stable drug as you get Tylenol or one of those other drugs, because it does, temperature does affect it. It has to be kept from 59 to 77 degrees. So in Ohio, you know, in the summer, the inside of your car can get to be 120 degrees. or it can, in the winter, it can be negative 10, 15, 20 degrees. So you can't keep it in your car. You have to keep it on your person, take it into your house, keep it in a purse, keep it in a backpack, something like that, where it is not on those extreme temperatures, okay? I always worry about the homeless people that we give them to because they live in tents or literally underneath a bridge, and I'm just afraid of, I really don't know, if it's in really cold 30 degrees like yesterday, how it's going to work. So I worry about them all the time. The other thing is 18 to 24 months. The ones that you're getting today are expire in July of 2019. So you've got quite a bit of time. So again, temperature affects it greatly. So what's an overdose look like? So again, I told you it affects the respiratory system of your body. And if you overdose on an opioid, you stop breathing if enough of those receptors are covered. So there'll be slower, shallow breathing or no breathing whatsoever. And your lips and fingernails, mucous membranes that are pink, normally they start to get a little blue, which is called cyanosis, and that's just a lack of oxygen. So this right here is a key point to remember. If you see somebody with pinpoint pupils about that 3 millimeters, about the width of a dime, if you see somebody with that, the opioid is virtually the only thing that does that. So that is a important sign to remember. 3 millimeters, and that's the opioid's the only thing that does that. The other thing is choking, loud snoring, and that is their respiratory drive, getting knocked out by those opioids. Their skin feels cold and clammy. That's their body, again, not getting oxygen to the skin. And if they're weak or no pulse, if there's no response, shake them, call their name if they don't respond. Does anybody know CPR? Is anybody taking CPR class, everything? Great. So one of the things they teach you is a sternal rub, and that is, I think the next one, your sternum is right here between all your ribs, and if you take your knuckles and rub that, is extremely painful, and if you do that and they do not respond, then it's a good chance that that is an opioid overdose. So, wrong button. So, a couple things you have to remember. Safety is key for somebody who's going to carry this and use it. A couple things. People who are injecting drugs have a much higher incidence of HIV and hepatitis, so you need to protect yourself. The kits that we give you tonight have both gloves and a barrier mask if you have to do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, so those are covered. The big thing in this, not only a lot of people are aware that you don't want to touch bodily fluids because they can have all kinds of stuff, but this last one, this fine white powder, unfortunately is fentanyl. A lot of the drugs that we have going around in the streets have fentanyl in them. I actually had a heroin addict that I gave a kit to a couple months ago. He's been a heroin addict for 15 years. And he said when he first started, he was buying this black tar heroin. And that's how it was for a while. Then he started seeing little gray speckles in it. And that's when fentanyl started coming around years ago. Now he says when he buys it, it's virtually all gray because there's so much fentanyl. They're finding fentanyl in cocaine. They're finding all kinds of different drugs. We've heard reports of it being in marijuana, which is horribly scary for the amount, it could be illegal anytime. So that's kind of scary. We're not really sure if that's true or not. Some people say it is, some people isn't. So you have to be very careful of that powder. Probably more like 8 months ago, I want to say it was in Middleburg, Ohio, there was a deputy sheriff that was investigating an overdose. And he did his thing in the house, came out to his cruiser, he's doing paperwork. And in Ohio, deputy sheriffs wear black, and he saw some white powder on his uniform, brushed it off, and he overdosed an hour later. So luckily his partner was around, had naloxone, gave it to him, and he's here today. He's alive to talk about it today. But that fentanyl is everywhere. That's why it's so important when you're going somewhere to wear gloves, and if you're going to do mouth-to-mouth, to use some sort of barrier device, simply for the fact that that fentanyl can be around their mouth or their nose. So you must protect yourself at all times. So, needles. Obviously, there's been a lot of stuff in the news about people finding needles on the streets, doing our street medicine where we go out to the homeless camps. We see them all the time out there, out in the woods and everywhere. So if you find one, if you're in a place that you see somebody that has one, never, ever recap it. As paramedics, we don't recap needles. In the hospitals, we don't recap needles. We just put them into sharps containers where they can be disposed of properly. If you are in a situation, if you're given naloxone, cover that needle if you can. So if the police or firemen come in, that they don't kneel on it. Just make them aware that it's there so they don't kneel on it, and they'll take that so nobody else can use it. So this is a big deal. So your physical safety. I tell everybody, and I don't mean this to make light of anything, but the first probably 25 years of my career, I probably gave naloxone maybe 5-6 times. And I think that's a stretch. The last 5 or 6 years of my career, probably a part of or given it myself hundreds of times. Not one person has thanked me. And now we don't do it for thanks. And again, I don't mean to make light of it. But the reason I say that is you do two things when you give naloxone with somebody who is high on heroin. The first thing you do is you take away their high. And if they have had to work for that money to buy that drug or whatever, they're not happy with you. But the second thing, and more importantly, you put them into immediate withdrawal. It is immediate. Now, you're not going to die from an opiate withdrawal, but you're not going to be real happy. So before I retired in 2016, the last guy that I gave it to, his mom called 911. We came there, gave him naloxone, and he's hopefully alive today. But he attacked his mom as soon as he was awake. So they are not happy, and it's virtually immediate. So your safety, I always tell everybody, if you're going to give it, make sure you are between the victim and a door. So if they get aggressive, if they're going to attack you, you leave. You've done your due diligence. You've done your job. You gave naloxone. You gave them a second chance. Now you've got to go because your safety is paramount. Okay? So 911, we usually think of that as a no-brainer, but the 911 dispatcher can do a couple of things for you. So a number of people have had CPR, but obviously we do it every couple years. And if it's been a year, if it's been a year and a half, you may not remember, that dispatcher can walk you through that CPR. They can also, if you've never had CPR, they're trained to talk you through it, to do it just like you've had the class. It's obviously real easy. The other thing is making sure that those medics come, because remember I said naloxone will wear off within 30 to 90 minutes. So they can take the drug, they overdose, you give Narcan, 30 to 90 minutes. If they don't go to the hospital, the naloxone wears off and they re-overdose on the same drug again. Those medics have more Narcan and we get them to the hospital and they can be watched for up to 4 hours so they can get more naloxone. And unfortunately, because of the amount of fentanyl, it may take more naloxone than what you're given. It may take more than what the medics have on their trucks, although they're carrying a lot more than what they used to. So, how do we give it? It's as simple as an allergy nasal spray. This is a trainer, but this is all that it is right here. And all you do is you open the package, you take this out, and I tell everybody, do not do like you see people do with syringes, like in hospitals and TV shows where they prime it to get a little bit of the air out, because there is literally 0.1 milliliter of liquid in here, and if you do that, it's gone. So I tell everybody, hold it like this. Don't put your thumb here. You simply put it in their one nostril and give it a spray, and that's it. You wait just a couple minutes. The literature says 2 to 5. I say 2 to 3. If it hasn't worked in 3, give the second one. Each one gives 4 milligrams of the drug, and hopefully that'll take care of it. So there it is. Simply put it in one nostril, spray, and that's it. So signs of improvement. Obviously, if they're not breathing and they start breathing, that's a great improvement, right? So their circulation is coming back, their pulse is getting back, and the body takes a little bit time to reboot things. So it may not be normal right off the bat, but nonetheless, it'll start getting pretty quickly. Their skin tone, again, they're getting oxygen back. So everything that was starting to get cyanotic or blue, it's starting to pink up again, and things are looking a lot better. And again, they're conscious and alert. So if that's the case, if it works, everything's getting great, we want you to put them in this recovery position, laying on their side, one knee forward, one arm up, another arm forward, and that's so there's a good chance that they could vomit, and we don't want that to go back in. That's aspiration pneumonia. That's a whole another big medical issue in itself. So we want to make sure that they're in this position. So what's an opiate withdrawal look like? Again, some of these come later, but muscle aches, excessive sweating, anxiety, agitation, insomnia, tearing of the eyes, runny nose, rapid pulse, seizures. And this last one, again, this is very important because it happens very quickly, is combative behavior. And I want you to make sure that you're protecting yourself. So what if it doesn't work? Again, 30 to 90 minutes, it can wear off and they can re-overdose. So make sure 911 is called, and consider rescue breathing and CPR. So no normal breathing. If you give when you first start rescue breathing, if you recall, if you've had CPR, and if you haven't, I ask you to go take a class. 75% of people who do CPR do it on a loved one, so it's a good skill to have, good thing to keep up. So again, use a barrier mask. There's one we give you one in the kit that we give you, and you're going to give 2 full breaths. You tilt their head back, pinch their nose, and you look down their chest, you breathe into their mouth, and watch their chest rise. If the chest doesn't rise, then reposition the head a little bit more, and then give 2 full breaths again. And then you're going to give 1 breath every 5 to 6 seconds. So CPR, it's a lot easier now. I mean, they've done a lot of studies where you can do hands-only CPR, and you actually don't have to do the breathing. They found that oxygen stays in the body a lot longer in the important areas than they originally thought. So if you only do compressions, you take the heel of one hand. If you follow your ribs up, there's a little thing that hangs down called the xiphoid process. 2 fingers above that, heel of one hand, and you push down 2 inches, 100 to 120 compressions, about 2 inches. And it's a lot of work. And does anybody who had CPR remember the song that you do it to? Staying Alive, that's right. That's the beat. And it's a lot of work, so 100 to 120 beats a minute. And if you have an AED, automatic external defibrillator, they're great, great devices. And what they do is they give the shock that medics give and the hospitals give. A lay person can open it up. It turns on automatically. Has great little pictures that shows where the patches go. And you push a button, it analyzes and says shock, and then you push the button. Great, great device. So that's the whole thing. There are a couple laws really quick that Ohio has passed to allow us to do this. One is dispensing. You can go into any pharmacy and ask for naloxone without a prescription, and they'll give it to you. If they have it, they'll give it to you. And they'll give you a little training, and sometimes on the boxes, there's all this stuff on how to give naloxone. So again, you don't need a prescription. The next one is if something happens in the course of you giving naloxone, it's just like the Good Samaritan law, the regular Good Samaritan law, and it covers you. You cannot be prosecuted for giving this in a proper way. Then the last one, the 911 Good Samaritan law, was really important because as medics, we were being called to gas stations where they would overdose in a drug house or a friend's house, whatever. They didn't want to be prosecuted, so they would bring them to a gas station and dump them off, and the gas station would end up calling 911. We're hoping that this law right here, where if you do call, if you're in a drug house or if you're in a friend's house and somebody does overdose, the person who calls and the person who overdoses will not be prosecuted, cannot be arrested for doing the right thing and calling. Okay, and they say it is if they get treatment within 30 days. And a little secret, I've had people say that nobody's watching that, and it's just we want people to call 911 for it. Okay? Any questions whatsoever? I know it was quick, but again, this is pretty easy. Yes, sir.
Do you believe that all pharmacies are aware of the passage of the law that if you go into a pharmacy and ask for naloxone, they would give it to you?
I don't know that. I would hope that the pharmacist would. I have heard that maybe there are some small little pharmacies at places that don't agree with it and won't carry it. But I think all the major ones will, and I think they're probably pretty up on the laws. Okay, anything else? Yes. So this is a one-time shot right here. I mean, you give it once and it's gone. There is no, and I'm not sure what you're asking. If you build up a tolerance, somebody did ask me that. Or
let's say you're walking down the street and you see somebody overdosing, you give them one time, and then put it away, and then next week you see somebody else that's overdosing, and then you.
So the answer to that is no, simply because that every form of naloxone is a one-time deal. You give it all. So if you could get another kit, obviously you can use it as much as you want. But the only other kind besides this is a syringe, and it has probably around 8 to 10 milliliters of liquid in it, but you still give all of that. So it's one time, one shot. Okay? Yes, sir. I say 2 to 3 minutes.
You wait 2 to 3, and it's not taking, and you use your second one. Do you use that same nostril, or do you try the other nostril?
You can use the other one. Now, with the other kind, the one in the syringe, you do half in one nostril, half in the other. This one, obviously, you're going to give it all in one, and it's not going to hurt. Maybe they have something wrong with their septum, and it didn't get through. And you can give the other one a try, sure. Okay? Yes, sir.
I want to clarify that, so if you go to your pharmacy, the pharmacy won't give it to you for free. I just want to make sure.
Oh, good point.
They would sell it to you at whatever their rate is, their price is, your insurance company. As part of Project Dawn, through our foundation, we're able to offer these at no cost tonight. But if you go to your pharmacy, you will be charged. And it'd be anywhere from, probably $80 to $130.
We've actually heard with most people's insurance, it ends up being like a $40 copay, but then again, it depends on your insurance. This one is the more expensive of the two different types, but again, your insurance. So part of what we do, Project Dawn, I probably should have said this in the beginning, Project Dawn stands for Death Avoidance with Naloxone. And if you are a Project Dawn site, you cannot charge for naloxone. Again, you can buy it. Southeast Area Mental Health is a Project Dawn site. There are a couple others. Mount Carmel, we have ours also as Project Dawn, so we give it free. And I believe if you go on Project Dawn Columbus, it'll give you all the sites that you can get them for free. Okay? And by the way, that was my boss from Mount Carmel. not just another heckler. Yes, sir. So we give you 2 in each kit, 2 4 milligram. And I'd be willing to bet, because of the fentanyl, you're going to need both of them every time that you give it. Okay, unfortunately. Anything else? Folks, thanks very much for sticking around. And there's a table right there outside the auditorium. Thank you. I was going to say I was certainly not going to be as eloquent and as interesting as all the other speakers, but at least you're getting this. You're getting naloxone. Thank you very much. The table in the back, and we're going to hand them out. Thank you. Thank you.